The Subcommittee on Energy, Climate, and Grid Security will now come to order, and I'd like to take a moment to welcome our newest member to the subcommittee, Congressman Rick Allen from Georgia. Welcome to the subcommittee. Chair will now recognize himself for a 5-minute opening statement. Welcome to today's hearing to review the Department of Energy's performance and fulfillment of its statutory responsibilities and to examine the department's FY 2025 budget request to Congress. Welcome back to the committee, Secretary Granholm. The Department of Energy has immense national security responsibilities to protect America's energy security and to oversee the nation's nuclear weapons program. DOE also conducts and oversees taxpayer-funded research and development and provides loans and grants to help commercialize energy-related technologies. These hearings are essential to ensure that the department is sticking to its core mission and acts as a responsible steward of taxpayer resources. These hearings are essential. Members will also have an opportunity to examine the Department of Energy's expanding budget request. This year, the Department of Energy is requesting $51.4 billion. Since FY 2021, the DOE's budget has increased by about $12 billion, and that's about 30% increase. After 3 years of President Biden's war on American energy, the American people are suffering. The administration's blind obsession to transition everyone away from fossil fuels is straining household budgets. It's putting the American dream further and further out of reach for many struggling families. Inflation is out of control. Sky-high energy prices and persistent supply chain shortages are impacting our economy and our safety. From groceries to electric bills, everything costs more under President Biden's energy policies. Americans expect that when we flip the switch or turn the key, that power comes on immediately. In America, if you want to build a home or expand a business, we expect that the infrastructure can be built quickly and predictably. Regrettably, under President Biden, supply chain shortages and price spikes have crippled our economic growth and made it more difficult to build out new infrastructure. The Department of Energy has played a role in the energy price spikes and persistent supply chain shortages. DOE has mismanaged our strategic petroleum reserves, draining the stockpile to its lowest level in the nation's history, with no credible plan to replenish it and no plan to increase domestic energy production. The DOE has turned a blind eye to punitive EPA regulations that have forced the premature retirement of our most affordable and reliable coal, gas, and nuclear power plants and threatened the reliability and stability of our electric grid. The DOE has pursued a radical climate agenda to impose new federal regulations for household appliances, electrical equipment, building construction, and natural gas usage. DOE also recently imposed a ban on the issuance of new LNG export permits, a political reward for the keep-it-in-the-ground climate activist in an election year. As the committee learned during a field hearing in Port Arthur, Texas, the LNG export ban has created hardships and pain for thousands of workers and families along the Gulf Coast, and it's made us less secure as a nation. The Democrats' radical transition plans and the Department of Energy's refusal to accept and address the threats facing our energy systems has required Congress to act. Under the Republican majority, the House has passed a bipartisan legislation to rein in the Department of Energy and the Biden administration. At the beginning of this Congress, we passed H.R. 1 to unleash American energy and modernize our energy infrastructure. In the months that followed, we passed bills to reverse punitive regulations and policy decisions that the Secretary of Energy has signed off on. We passed legislation to reverse the ban on gas stoves to prevent DOE from draining our strategic petroleum stockpile and selling it to China, and to reverse the DOE's moratorium on new LNG export permits. Today's hearing, we will allow the Secretary of Energy to answer for the Biden administration's war on American energy. We stand at a pivotal time in our nation's history, and the decisions that are made today will impact our kids and grandkids for generations. We have a simple choice. We can embrace America's energy abundance and cement our position as the world's #1 energy superpower, or we can follow the Biden administration's plan to rely on China for batteries, electric cars, and solar panels made with slave labor and environmental abuses. As it has been said in this committee before, I believe we need an American energy expansion, not an energy transition to China. critical part of this energy expansion is nuclear energy. And I'm pleased with this administration's dedication to expanding nuclear energy, and I look forward to continuing to work with both my colleagues here in Congress and the Biden administration on advancing that particular goal. With that, I look forward to today's hearing, and I'll yield my time back and recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. DeGette, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And thanks and good morning, Secretary Granholm. It's great having you with us today. I want to commend you and your agency for the critical work that you've been doing to help combat the climate crisis and also to support our efforts to speed our transition towards renewable energy. As I've said countless times before, the climate crisis is truly an existential threat to the future of this planet, and we have to start addressing it right away. We know the only way to do it is by significantly cutting our greenhouse gas emissions as quickly as we can while preserving our economy and our way of life. But to do that, we have to start that transition to clean energy right now. Breaking our reliance on fossil fuels will not only help us stave off the worst effects of the climate crisis, but it will also protect consumers across the country from sudden increases in energy costs, and it'll make sure that all Americans have access to the reliable energy that they need. And so I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the hard work of the Department of Energy employees in implementing 3 historic bills that are cutting costs for working families, creating new jobs, and addressing the climate crisis. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provided $1.2 trillion to our nation's infrastructure. The Inflation Reduction Act invested $369 billion in clean American energy leadership and addressing greenhouse gas pollution, while the CHIPS and Science Act boosted domestic research and manufacturing right here in the United States. And the Department of Energy's proposed fiscal year 25 budget complements and builds upon those efforts and pushes us closer to achieving net zero emissions and a clean energy future. By increasing funding for key research projects and initiatives and continuing to focus on supply chain development and workforce transition, the department is helping us create a cleaner, more diverse energy portfolio here in the United States. The agency's plans to invest $18.1 billion for energy programs, including $8.6 billion for the Office of Science, will help advance the research, development, and demonstration of clean energy technologies, and also support the work that's been being done by our national laboratories. While there's no doubt we still have a long way to go in completing this clean energy transition, the investments that will be made under the budget will provide critical support to this incredibly important endeavor. For example, it will provide $180 million for the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations to support large industrial decarbonization projects. And it includes $1.6 billion to support the clean energy workforce and to help fund key infrastructure projects across the nation, including millions of dollars to help low-income communities weatherize and retrofit their homes to lower energy costs for families that have been forced to disproportionately bear the brunt of this climate crisis. Each one of these proposals will play a critical role in helping us to control the climate crisis. They will also help us not only stabilize the cost of energy here at home, but will help lower the cost of energy for many Americans by making critical new investments to increase energy efficiency and drive the innovation of new clean energy technologies. The budget also makes common sense investment in cyber and energy system security. I know that's important both to the chairman and myself, as well as environmental health and management for low-income communities. It includes $142 million for the Energy Information Agency, whose work provides critical energy information and data that involves our work. And it includes $149 million for the DOE, Office of the Inspector General, to make sure that taxpayer funds are being used efficiently and effectively. I believe that the budget will further support the work DOE has been doing to make the United States a leader in the clean energy transition. And I once again want to thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. Mr. Chairman, before I yield back, the majority's hearing memo had a number of errors in it when it came to stating components of the DOE's fiscal year 2025 budget request. In one situation, It misstated the total amount spent on energy programs by $9 billion. You can see it's a lot of little type and numbers. So because I want to make sure that the record is, it's the record of this hearing, so I want to make sure it reflects reality. So I would ask unanimous consent to insert the DOE's own budget estimate into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thanks. And with that, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. I'll now recognize the chair of the full committee, Ms. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Secretary Granholm, welcome back. Today is an opportunity to discuss the President's budget and priorities for the Department of Energy. This committee plays a critical role in ensuring U.S. energy security and leadership. For decades, America has led the way. We've harnessed the power of nuclear energy, electrified millions of rural Americans' homes with clean hydropower, and ushered in the shale revolution, creating millions of new jobs, empowering economic prosperity. America was able to achieve this through free market principles, entrepreneurship, and giving people the opportunity to choose which energy sources best suit their needs. Energy and Commerce Republicans have been working to protect and expand this legacy for generations to come. The Biden administration, on the other hand, seems to be dismantling that legacy. This administration's policies continue to put America on a dangerous path that harms our security and gives our adversaries like China control over our energy supply chains. This administration has consistently sought to prevent or slow the development of American oil and gas resources, which are critical to our own energy security, as well as the security of our allies. DOE has been complicit in these actions with the effective ban on new LNG exports. American LNG has been a lifeline, especially to our European allies, since Russia invaded Ukraine. In the aftermath of this invasion, American LNG helped them reduce their natural gas prices by over 83% and reduce their dependence on Russia. This ban sends a signal to our allies that we're no longer a dependable energy partner. We find this unacceptable. Another example is the recent decision to limit energy development in more than half of the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. Doubling down on policies to restrict oil and gas, to retire baseload power generation, and to promote widespread, unaffordable, unreliable electrification is not how we secure our energy future. And unfortunately, it's Americans that are feeling the impacts of this radical rush to green agenda. Since President Biden took office, electricity prices have risen some 30%. That's almost 50% more than overall inflation. Unilateral actions like these taken by the administration continue to drive out affordable, reliable baseload generation needed to keep prices low, keep the lights on. Grid operators and others have been sounding the alarm for years, warning that the U.S. is on a dangerous, unsustainable path. And continuing down this path will mean higher energy prices and more catastrophic blackouts across the country, like what's already happening in places like California. As the head of DOE, it is the Secretary's responsibility to ensure American energy security and leadership. Yet this department continues to stand by and watch as EPA imposes requirements that harm our ability to generate reliable power. Is the department ceding its energy and grid expertise to the EPA? EPA policies, like their new particulate matter standards, will make permitting new manufacturing and industry almost impossible. Impossible in large regions across the country. And I'd like to understand why DOE thinks that we can succeed under these types of anti-manufacturing, really anti-American policies, which are undermining the very manufacturing programs DOE supports to help restore American leadership in critical energy materials and reduce our reliance on China. Instead of undermining American energy and economic success, let's work together to build on our remarkable legacy, which has transformed the human condition, lifted people out of poverty, raised the standard of living more than any other nation in the world. And the best way to do this is with a strong energy mix that takes advantage of the resources we have here at home, lower costs for Americans, and prevents us from being reliant on China. This administration's forced transition will leave our economy dangerously dependent upon supply chains controlled by China and make energy less affordable, less reliable for Americans. I believe the Department of Energy serves a critical role in assuring sound energy policies and also providing the support necessary for innovation to flourish. That's the goal today, and I look forward to the Department of Energy stepping up so that we can accomplish that goal. I yield back. Thank you.
Generally yields back. The chair will now recognize the ranking member of the full committee. And just as a side note, we lost a colleague, Donald Payne, and I thought Mr. Pallone's comments on the floor the other day were very apropos, and I appreciate what you said about my friend. Recognize Mr. Pallone for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for what you said, and I'll remind my colleagues that if they would like to go to the funeral for Donald Payne, there's a plane going on Thursday morning that would be back by the end of the day to Newark for the funeral. We'd certainly like you to come. Let me just say, I wanted to welcome the Secretary, and it's great to have you again before the Energy Subcommittee, but I have to disagree with the Chair in sort of a general sense that I do believe that you and this administration have done more to achieve energy independence than anyone else since I've been here. If you look at the record, the fact of the matter is that this president and you have encouraged energy independence by actually increasing the amount of both oil and natural gas that's produced here. When you talk about LNG, for the record, the reality is that although we have this public interest review that is being that you're conducting, the fact is that there are more LNG exports than ever before. They are anything that's been permitted already is already in the pipeline, is constantly being produced. And our allies in Europe have enough LNG for the next 5 years. This administration and I also take the position that while we prioritize clean energy and we want to move towards clean energy and renewables, that doesn't mean that we're not producing more oil and natural gas. It doesn't mean that we're not exporting more LNG. It doesn't mean that we are also trying to increase nuclear output and new nuclear plants. So I think the energy mix that the chair talked about is exactly what you've been trying to do, all of the above, an energy mix to achieve energy independence. And we're more independent today, in my opinion, than we've ever been under any other previous administration. And I think it's exciting to see all the hard work pay off from both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. These laws are expected to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the United States to 40% below 2005 levels by 2030. And these two laws are growing and modernizing our economy for the future, cutting costs for working families, advancing clean energy projects across the country, and tackling the climate crisis while we try to reduce any dependence on China and grow our manufacturing here. The DOE is at the forefront of implementing these landmark laws, and new funding announcements come out from your office almost every day. Since the Inflation Reduction Act passed, companies have moved forward over 500 new clean energy projects, leading to over 271,000 new jobs already. And I am also pleased that the Biden administration, unlike the previous Trump administration, is finalizing energy efficiency rules that help Americans save money and reduce emissions. These recently finalized energy efficiency standards for residential refrigerators and freezers could save families more than $36 billion over 30 years, while avoiding 101 million metric tons of carbon emissions. Now, of course, the committee Republicans continue to target these standards, passing bills that are nothing more than gifts to corporate polluters. I understand we may have one of these bills up as early as next week. And it's just a shame because people want more efficient appliances. They talk about freedom to have whatever refrigerator you want. I mean, I think of freedom as, our freedom as a democracy, not the freedom of the refrigerator, but whatever. We're bolstering American manufacturing with massive investments in domestic manufacturing, but Republicans continue to ignore the fact that other countries around the world, including China, are investing in clean energy and ensuring their ability to compete in a global market. Madam Secretary, under your leadership, we have seen investments over $120 million, billion, I should say, in battery manufacturing and supply chains, and over $35 billion in electric vehicle assembly plants. And these private sectors, essentially the private sector is responding to your actions. And it's great to see American companies leading the transition to clean energy. So I just want to stress again, what you're doing is working with the private sector, using these investments at the federal level to bring back manufacturing here, looking at all of the above in terms of an energy policy that makes us more independent. But at the same time, we have to be conscious of the climate and the change that's happening and the increased amount of greenhouse gases. And so we do have to prioritize clean energy and renewables, but not at the expense of the other things. So thank you again, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. We'll now conclude with the member opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to the committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. Madam Secretary, we're going to thank you for being here and taking time to testify. Secretary will have the opportunity to give an opening statement, and we'll follow that with a round of questions from members. And our witness today, of course, is the Honorable Jennifer Granholm, Secretary of Energy of the United States Department of Energy. And Madam Secretary, I now recognize you for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair Rogers, Chair Duncan, ranking members Pallone and DeGette. Thank you. And of course, members of the committee, I'm honored to be with you today to discuss President Biden's latest budget request for the Department of Energy. 3 years ago, I joined this administration believing that if America came together around a national energy strategy, we could restore manufacturing and create jobs and address the climate crisis and lead the world in clean energy. And today we are doing just that. America is back. Thanks to Congress's efforts and the President's vision, we are executing a focused, deliberate strategy that positions us to become energy independent and secure. This strategy positions our businesses to dominate, our workers to compete, and our communities to thrive. And it is already working. Since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, companies have announced more than 600 new or expanded clean energy manufacturing plants on American soil in many of your states. Nearly $200 billion in planned investment for batteries, for electric vehicles, for solar, for wind, for nuclear, and more. Tens of thousands of jobs being created from Colorado to California, from North Carolina to New Hampshire, Washington to West Virginia, and everywhere in between, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Sustaining that growth, such growth, requires us to complement that historic funding with durable, long-term investments, and the President's budget request for fiscal year 25 will empower us to build on that progress. Our commercialization tools are giving American businesses the confidence they need to capitalize on this moment while deepening our energy security. But deepening our energy security is an ongoing project, and we need to fund it year over year, and that's why the budget calls for significant appropriations for our demonstration and deployment programs, including our Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains and our Grid Deployment Office. And here, let me thank the chairwoman and this committee for its bipartisan efforts to ban the import of Russian uranium. You should feel great about that. I know that the Senate acted last night to pass your legislation, and it's moving to the President's desk as we speak, and that ban will allow DOE to build a more robust domestic uranium industry through funds provided in the 2024 spending agreement. Meanwhile, the department is making sure every community can benefit from reliable, affordable, clean energy and efficiency technologies, and we're leveraging dedicated funding from the infrastructure law for our interagency working group on coal and power plant communities. I have seen firsthand how this program gives communities the gift of rebirth. It instills pride for the workers who defined America's energy past and will help to power America's energy future. This budget also includes an historic $25 billion for our National Nuclear Security Administration. Russia's continued war in Ukraine makes nuclear deterrent paramount to our national defense and the security of our allies, and that's why I want to thank Congress again for passing the supplemental appropriations bill last week. This bill also provides, $149 million for DOE's activity, that's supplemental, to help reduce nuclear threats in Ukraine, and it also includes $98 million to shore up supply chains of critical isotopes, too much of which are concentrated in Russia. These investments will make the United States and the world safer. And further, the President has requested $8.2 billion for our Office of Environmental Management, which oversees the largest environmental cleanup program in the world. The 25 request will allow us to build on these results and deepen our engagement with local tribes and communities as they plan for the future of those sites. And it will help us recruit and train a new cohort of legacy management workers and leaders. So, thanks to the bipartisan assistance we've received from Congress, America is back. We are the envy of the world. But we can't afford to lose our momentum, and that depends on your continued support. So thank you for the opportunity to address you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your testimony. We'll now move into the question and answer portion of today's hearing, and I'll begin recognizing myself for 5 minutes for questions. There's no question the United States is staring down an electric reliability crisis. FERC commissioners, grid operators, state commissioners, and reliability experts have all testified in this committee about the vulnerable state of our grid and the growing likelihood of blackouts. One FERC commissioner went so far as to say, quote, "There will be, in time, a catastrophic reliability event." Secretary Granholm, as Secretary of Energy, do you share these authorities' concerns about the state of our grid reliability?
I definitely share the concern that the grid is not up to what it needs to be in order to allow us to continue to grow. We know that demand for energy is increasing. We know that the grid is old, and the poles and the wires and the transformers, they need to be replaced. It was built in the 50s and 60s in many places. And so we need to continue to invest in upgrading the grid, hardening the grid, and expanding the grid.
Thank you. And to do that, we're going to need to mine more in this country. It's another agency, but critical mining for copper and other components is necessary. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, and the grid operators have warned about policies to transition Americans away from fossil fuels, prematurely retiring coal and natural gas power plants, and canceling pipelines. You're responsible for coordinating national energy policy. Does the administration recognize that premature retirement of electric generation threatens this reliability of our grid?
We want to make sure that we manage this transition in a way that ensures the power is on and we continue to move to clean energy. So it is critical that we continue to use the tools at our disposal. We just issued a grid liftoff report, which describes some of the tools that we have not had in the past to be able to ensure we can add capacity to our grid and harden it. For example, making sure that we can reconductor to put twice the power on existing power lines, or that we use more grid-enhancing technologies to smartly move power on the grid, or to use new opportunities, tools like virtual power plants to be able to access additional power. In addition to the great opportunity that Congress gave us in the Inflation Reduction Act to incentivize additional generation of electricity. All of that is happening. We have managed increases in demand in the past, and we can manage them going forward.
Reliability means 24/7 baseload power generation that you don't get from a lot of renewables. Let me shift gears. The lack of pipeline capacity to energy-constrained regions is also a grid reliability concern. The CEO of ISO New England testified to this very committee that New England is in desperate need of more pipeline capacity, even with growth in renewables. My home state of South Carolina is facing these same issues. We had the ACP get canceled. MVP had tremendous delays. We finally were able to get that done. Secretary Granholm, you yourself have stated that pipelines are the safest way to transport fuels, whether it's gas or liquids. I agree with you. Pipelines are critical for maintaining energy reliability, especially to balance the intermittency of renewables. Do you agree that we need to build more pipelines in this country?
I think in some places, we will need to build new pipelines, and I think we definitely need to build new pipelines for hydrogen, for the movement of CO2, as well as traditional energy.
Thank you. Would you rather utilize natural gas from the Marcellus or the Permian Basin or import LNG from a foreign country?
I don't think we need to import any natural gas. We have enough supply here.
Amen to that. That's why we need pipelines in New England, because they're importing LNG. I want to thank you for your efforts on nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is a critical source of reliable generation, and so happy that the chairwoman's bill got passed by the Senate yesterday. Look forward to the president signing that. Last month, this committee held a hearing on spent nuclear fuel policy. One issue that came out of this hearing was the loss of capacity and credibility of DOE's spent fuel program after it dismantled its office dedicated to spent fuel management about 14 years ago. The law requires DOE to have a dedicated office to manage spent fuel and nuclear waste, which will help credibly address the federal government's obligations and strengthen the public's confidence. Will you look into resurrecting the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management and to fulfill DOE's statutory duty under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act?
Well, I do think that our Office of Nuclear Energy and our Office of Environmental Management both do aspects of that. We are interested in spent fuel use and wise storage of spent fuel as well, and both of those are being addressed in those offices.
Thank you. I take that as a no on the resurrection, but allowing the agency to continue its path. I believe it's important to establish a comprehensive fuel management plan, and that would be a good first step. I'm finished with my questions, so I'll now recognize the ranking member to get for her 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk about methane this morning. And as you know, Madam Secretary, reducing methane is probably the easiest and quickest opportunity our nation and world has to address the rate of warming that our planet is experiencing. So I just want to set the stage a little bit. Is it true that methane is responsible for about 1/3 of the current warming our planet is experiencing?
Yes.
And also, is it true that oil and natural gas operations are our nation's largest industrial source of methane?
Yes.
So in June of 2021, President Biden signed into law a Congressional Review Act invalidating the Trump administration's 2020 methane rescission rule, which tried to block EPA's authority to regulate methane from existing sources. I was really proud to lead this effort on the House side, which reinstated 2 Obama-era methane emissions rules that set stricter limits on the amount of methane that the oil and gas industry can release from drilling sites. So, Secretary, I'd like to ask, the administration's final methane rule addresses emissions from both new and existing oil and gas operations. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, why is it important to address existing sources of methane in the oil and gas industry?
Well, clearly, it's such a powerful greenhouse gas, and we want to make sure that and in addition, it's waste. I
Right.
mean, it should be captured and used as natural gas. And so it is wasteful, and it contributes to greenhouse gases. And frankly, it's the lowest hanging fruit for how we can address climate change.
Right, and I mean, I talked to some of the oil and gas companies, the responsible ones, and they say, if we can capture this methane, we can actually make a profit. So why would we just let it go into the air? Isn't that accurate?
That's exactly right. And they see it. I mean, the oil and gas industry, the majors particularly see it as an opportunity for them, and many of them have taken steps to do that.
That's right. Last December, the Department of Energy announced conditional approval of $12.6 million from the Inflation Reduction Act to Colorado to the Department of Natural Resources to help measure and reduce methane emissions. And in January, the Department of Energy's Loan Programs Office announced a conditional commitment of funding to Long Path Technologies, which are in Boulder, Colorado, just north of my district, to support the creation and installation of real-time methane emissions monitoring networks across multiple states. So I'm interested in how this works. How would the real-time monitoring of methane support the administration's methane reduction goals?
Well, first of all, I want to say your Methane Emissions Technology Evaluation Center, METEC, also in Colorado at Colorado State, got a $25 million award to be able to help us do just that. There are a number of entities right now that are trying to identify the best ways, using the best next generation technology to identify. ARPA-E has got a number of companies that they have invested in to do that. I know that EDF has just put a satellite into the air, a methane sat, to be able to do that real-time detection and reporting, because reporting is an important part of that so that we know where the leaks are, and if the entity responsible for that pipe or that flaring is not taking advantage of it, the public entities should be able to go and say, you need to button this down. So super important. Methane leak detection, mitigation, reporting, and validation are all an important strategy, and Colorado's right at the center of it.
As per usual. So, switching gears, we heard a lot last year about worst-case scenarios if DOE finalized any efficiency standard for distribution transformers. But DOE has finalized the distribution transformer efficiency standard, and from my perspective, the reaction from industry seemed to indicate that they're okay with this. Can you elaborate how the final rule shows the process and guardrails established for efficiency standards under the Energy Policy and Conservation Act?
Yeah, I so appreciate this question, because this is the great thing about our government is that it allows for us to propose a potential rule, to get stakeholder feedback, and to modify the rule based upon that feedback for a final rule. And that's exactly what happened in the distribution transformer case. We wanted to make sure that there is enough of the grain-oriented electric steel for distribution transformers in the United States. That was how the final rule came out. And yes, industry was happy, and we have got a good balance to be able to achieve efficiency, but also ensure that we are manufacturing the distribution transformers in the United States.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
John Lay's time's expired, and I'll now recognize Ms. Rogers for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here, Secretary Granholm. I wanted to start with nuclear policy and appreciate you joining in recognizing and celebrating the bill heading to the President's desk to ban the import of uranium from Russia. I believe this is very important in sending the signal to the markets that America is committed to restoring our nuclear leadership and having a strong and secure supply chains in the United States, and look forward to working with you to make sure that we implement that ban in a way that's going to strengthen our industry. Also, wanted to shift then to reliability, electric reliability, certainly with this just forced transition in place across the board. Electric reliability is a challenge that is facing many people, many states, many regions of the country. NERC continues to issue these warnings to much of the country to anticipate brownouts, blackouts. And unfortunately, we see this forced retirement of baseload generation that's impacting reliability. I wanted to ask, because this is getting worse. Alarms bells were ringing in 2021, and it's gotten worse. The law requires you, as Secretary of Energy, to coordinate national energy policy. Would you agree that this involves federal actions that affect electricity supply and delivery?
Yes.
Are you comfortable allowing EPA to take actions that effectively dictate the electricity generation mix and, in effect, the energy policy of our nation and many states?
We have signed a memorandum of understanding with EPA and have worked with them on their standards. I'm very comfortable that what they have proposed is doable and that it will, in fact, increase our energy security.
EPA just issued new standards for power generators that rely upon the deployment of carbon capture technology, claiming that these technologies have been adequately demonstrated. And this is in direct conflict with the Department of Energy's own programs required by Congress to prove the carbon capture technology can work at scale in the power sector, which has not happened. Should EPA be proposing standards based upon technology that DOE has not yet shown to be adequately demonstrated in the power sector?
We believe that carbon capture technology is proven technology and is being demonstrated, for example, at the Petronova facility in Texas. That has been up for a long period of time. What hasn't been demonstrated is that there hasn't been a price on carbon that made it worthwhile for the private sector to step into this until now. With the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, now there is a price on carbon that makes that industry worthwhile looking into. And so we're excited about that, and we're excited about the demonstration projects in this new environment that our Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains Office is setting up.
Well, I know there's many anxious to get going. I wanted to shift gears a bit here. There's growing concerns about what's going on our college and university campuses around anti-Semitism and the protest. And what we're finding is that, these same colleges and universities benefit from millions and millions of dollars, federal taxpayer dollars, including Department of Energy that has issued hundreds of millions of dollars in grants and assistance to American universities. For FY22, we saw that over $900 million went to colleges and universities. I just wanted to ask, is there a central database? Can you tell me how much money Columbia University has gotten from the Department of Energy?
I don't have that figure in front of me, but I'm happy to get that back to you.
That would be helpful because I believe it's important. This committee is going to be taking action to ensure that these funds are complying with all applicable laws, including our Civil Rights Act. Another challenge is we seem to be continuing to lose our competitive edge to China, and when it comes to some of the supply chain issues on green and energy. Last year, DOE found a lack of sufficient guardrails or safeguards for intellectual property at its national labs, specifically the area of licensing technology to companies with foreign owners. In light of the issues raised in that report, I wanted to ask why DOE hasn't conducted a similar review of licensing practices at universities and other research entities.
We are, any entity that gets funding or partners with us on research, we have a very robust engagement with about what is a threat to us as taxpayers about protecting our intellectual property. And we have set up an entire ecosystem inside DOE to ensure that our intellectual property and our taxpayer dollars are protected.
Okay, well, we're deeply troubled, and we're deeply troubled with what's going on the college and university campuses, and any detailed information that you can give the committee would be appreciated. I'm sure we'll be following up. Thank you.
Generally yields back. I'll now go to the ranking member, Mr. Pallone, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I wanted to go back to this LNG issue. DOE's temporary pause of approval for new export applications for LNG. There's been a lot of Republican misinformation about this pause. They call it a ban. They've mentioned it as a ban in 2 separate hearings. So just yes or no, if you will, on each of these 4 questions, Secretary. For the record, first, is DOE's update to the public interest review a ban on LNG exports?
No.
Are current LNG exports impacted at all by the pause?
No.
Are future LNG exports that were already permitted impacted at all by the pause?
No.
Do you expect, that's the end of my yes or no. Well, I guess that's not true. I got one more yes or no. Do you expect the pause and the subsequent update of the public interest standard to impact the amount of natural gas available to our European allies in the near or medium term?
No.
Okay. And then I'll ask you more broadly. Can you briefly discuss whether or not LNG exports raise natural gas prices for American consumers?
Thanks for the question, because that is one of the issues that the update will examine. We currently produce just over 100 BCF, 105 BCF of natural gas in the United States. We have authorized for export 48 billion cubic feet of natural gas. And so the question is, if all of that has been authorized, was built out, and was exported, what would that do to prices at home for our consumers, our manufacturers, et cetera? That's one of the issues that is under review.
And I appreciate that, because I know you stressed affordability in your opening statement, and I think that's really the key issue of this committee across the board, whether it's healthcare, energy, use of, the whole issue of affordable connectivity for the internet. So I just, I just think it's clear from your answers that Republicans are misleading the public about the administration's LNG policy and effects. But these Republican tactics are nothing new. We're seeing the same thing when it comes to energy efficiency standards. As you know, Republicans continue to push bills. We understand they're starting to come up next week that target DOE's ability to set energy conservation standards for appliances to again lower energy costs for American families. You're trying to lower the costs. So, Secretary, can DOE promulgate energy conservation standards that are not technically feasible or economically justified? Yes or no?
No.
Okay, and that's what I thought, of course. And can you now elaborate on DOE's process for setting these efficiency standards, if you would?
Yeah, we have, under the ECPA, we have been doing this since 1975. We produce efficiency standards, make recommendations for efficiency standards on over 60 products of appliances. As a result of Congress's passing of this law, the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, we have saved consumers trillions of dollars. And just one example, if you buy a refrigerator today, it is half of the price of what it was in 1975. It has 20% more storage capacity, and it uses 1/4 the energy as a result of these standards. And we have more models than ever before. So don't underestimate, I would say, to those who criticizes the incredible ingenuity of the private sector to reach these standards and to provide consumers with lower cost appliances and more efficient appliances.
And then my last question, what are the benefits? I mean, you've talked a little bit about the benefits of appliance efficiency standards, and we know the Republicans are trying to upend this successful program, but what's at risk if Republicans succeed in upending your appliance efficiency program? What is the consequence?
Well, again, this, our whole effort here is to save energy and to save money on behalf of consumers. We're obsessed with reducing energy use and prices for people. And if consumers can save on average $500 a year by upgrading their appliances to more energy efficient appliances, that helps save a lot of people a lot of money. And so I would worry about eliminating any of this effort. We don't want to increase prices, we want to lower them.
And I appreciate that. And my understanding is that industry supports these efforts at more efficiency. The only people that oppose it are the Republicans in Congress, from what I can see. But thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Dr. Burgess for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got a number of questions on the LNG pause, but I'm going to submit those for writing because I want clarity in the answers. I do want to point out that 4 years ago, literally 4 years ago right now, the cost or the price of crude oil was pretty low. And there was an effort, a bipartisan effort in this committee, myself, Representative Fletcher from Houston, my Senator Cornyn, Senator Hoeven from North Dakota, to suggest that the Strategic Petroleum Reserve could be topped off while the cost of crude oil was at historic lows. This was declined by the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer in the Senate, and was not accomplished. However, then 2 years later, we saw a massive sell-off in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, not because of a national emergency, but because of a perceived political emergency by the administration. They were worried about their performance in the midterm elections. So they bought down the price at the pump for consumers after they had driven it up with energy policies instituted by this administration. And to my observation now, there really isn't an attempt to put those barrels back in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Is that correct?
No, let me clarify for you. I think there's a couple of things that you said that are inaccurate. Number one, the reason why the president ordered the sale of 180 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve was because Russia invaded Ukraine, and there was a crunch, a complete collapse of the ability to access
Yeah,
oil on a global market.
Because we're going
So
to
it was-
differ on geopolitical events. Russia
that
invaded
was
Ukraine
why.
because of the collapse of the administration's policy in Afghanistan and made Ukraine an attractive target. But nevertheless, there was an effort by the administration to reduce the price at the pump. And again, the emergency really didn't exist then. The emergency, though, may be right on our doorstep with how dangerous the world has become. And we are less in a position to respond to now a real and acute emergency because of the fact you drew it down in 2022.
First, we have the largest strategic petroleum reserve still in the world. The president ordered the 180 million barrels sold because of a global emergency. There was a global effort to put more supply on the market in addition to what the United States did. We have, in fact, begun a strategy of refilling. And I will say that Congress has ordered more barrels to be released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve through congressional mandatory sales for budget purposes than the president did. Thank you to Congress for canceling 140 million of those ordered mandatory sales, but there's another 100 million that we are going to have to sell because of congressional action as well.
Do you agree or disagree that the world is a dangerous place today?
Absolutely.
More so perhaps at any time in my lifetime, and I lived through the Cold War. I cannot remember a time where world events may be as tenuous as they are today. A simple miscalculation on someone's part could really put us in a position where the United States is in grave danger. So I want us to continue to focus on filling that Strategic Petroleum Reserve. To that, the state of Texas is willing to contribute, and we are always willing to step up. Let me ask you one other question before I run out of time. The all-in part of the president's budget for Department of Energy is roughly what? What is the
Sorry.
dollar figure?
The all-in,
Yeah, how much money does the president want?
51.4 billion.
Okay. I'm also on the Budget Committee and am acutely aware of the fact that we are in a budget crisis in this country. Our deficits are at levels that are unsustainable. The $51 billion requested in the budget, does that take into an account the cost of borrowing that money and the debt service on that money? Are there constant value dollars that are put into this calculation?
I am certain that it does because it's part of the president's overall budget.
I don't think that it does. I think we are being asked to spend $51 billion that is going to have to come from somewhere else. It's not being offset. Like, for example, why not take it from some of the Green New Deal provisions that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act so that we don't have to borrow this money from China and then our children and grandchildren pay it back?
Well, Congress has directed us to be able to spend the funding to be able to address climate change so that we can be more energy secure as a nation, and that's what we are doing. We're fulfilling Congress's obligations.
Thank you for elucidating that a strategic change in policy is going to be necessary. I hope the country delivers in November. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Mr. Peters, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I want to start by applauding you and President Biden through your implementation of the IRA and the IIJA. The administration has leveraged $649 billion in private investments in American energy and manufacturing. I think we can all agree that that's fantastic. But I also think we could do more. While 2023 was the strongest year on record for combined U.S. solar, wind, and energy storage installations, we still lag far behind China, who is dwarfing us in all those categories, as well as building out the grid. We're facing extraordinary growth in energy demand from electric vehicles, also from AI, from data centers, and the reshoring of domestic manufacturing, also thanks to the effort of the President Biden and his administration. But we will not be able to meet this energy demand nor our climate goals under the current permitting regime we have in this country. That's why I was happy to see the department's recent actions on permitting over the last few weeks, particularly through the Coordinated Interagency Transmission Authorizations and Permits Program, otherwise known as CITAP. These strong steps should meaningfully meaningfully move the needle on siting and permitting for critically needed energy infrastructure. And I think we should be celebrating those steps on both sides of the aisle. I want to specifically focus on the department's efforts to energize permitting or to expedite permitting for solar and storage technologies on disturbed, developed, and other lower conflict areas. Can you talk about what you've done so far and what Congress can do to give you additional authority to do more of this?
First of all, thank you so much for your leadership on this. And while we can do what we can with administrative powers, we're grateful for the effort to try to seek a bipartisan solution on permitting reform. We have been doing a number of things. As you say, the SITAP program cuts in more than half to 2-year shot clock for permitting on public lands for transmission. Very important, and that corresponds with Congress's direction under the Fiscal Responsibility Act to cut permitting times while still preserving the ability and the intent under NEPA to ensure that our environment is protected. So we're also looking at ways to use categorical exemptions and making sure that we are not requiring doubling the effort at permitting and NEPA reviews when it's not necessary, when you're not expanding a footprint or you're only expanding it minimally. We also think it's important to be able to use CADXs on the tools that allow us to reconductor, the tools that allow us to attach grid-enhancing technologies to transmission so that we can get more power more smartly across the transmission lines. So we're looking at all of those ways to be able to do what we can to move power and to more efficiently and to cut down on permitting times. But I know that there are other ideas that Congress has been working with, and we are very supportive of whatever can happen that does it. And one other thing I would just add is that we have just been given funding through the Permitting Council, Department of Energy has, to use AI to be able to do permitting for NEPA. So if we are able to use artificial intelligence to create a very efficient permitting regime, that is another step that we can take so that we don't wait 10 years for a transmission line to be permitted.
That's very helpful. You know, I've often observed that the laws of the 1970s were built for defense, keeping us from doing stupid things, which we were doing. And today, as climate action advocates, we are tasked with building a lot of stuff, including transmission, offshore wind, utility-scale solar, hydrogen pipelines, direct air capture, everything else. We got to figure out ways to make it go faster. And I also would encourage you to think about pre-approvals for particular technologies that we understand well, and particularly for disturbed areas where, you know, it's not a concern that we're disturbing an environmental resource. Do you have any thought on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. Those are ideas, the exact kind of ideas that we should be pursuing.
You've been asked about college campuses and everything else. This is supposed to be a hearing about the budget. And I do have a budget question, but I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to ask you it, and then we'll submit questions for the record so you can respond more fully. But it's about, you know, the quantity of personnel. Maybe this is partly AI. We're going to need to hire up to do all the analysis under the existing permit regime on all these projects. I've heard estimates of 30 to 60,000 new projects because of what Congress and the President have done through these laws. How are we going to pay for that? What's that going to cost?
Are you talking about AI, on the AI?
I'm not talking about AI, I'm talking about like the personnel. And not beyond just creating positions and funding positions, will we actually be able to hire folks in a challenged labor market? I'm out of time, so I'm going to put those questions in writing. But again, thank you for your help, and thanks so much for being here today. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I'll go to Mr. Latta for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Madam Secretary, thanks again for being with us today. I want to focus first on nuclear as a source of generation, and nuclear energy is widely supported in this committee and in Congress. As stated, our chair's Prohibiting Russian Uranium Imports Act passed on unanimous consent last night in the Senate, which is good news. Not only does this legislation put an end to Russian uranium imports, but it also unlocks $2.72 billion to ramp up domestic uranium fuel production that through my bill, the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, gives DOE the ability to incentivize a market for advanced fuels. DOE will also have the ability to strengthen the fuel infrastructure of the existing fleet. Madam Secretary, do you believe that DOE understands how the buying and selling of fuels and fuel services in the private market can distort that market when it starts implementing the program?
I think we are aware of market dynamics, and we have a team that is focused on doing this well. Happy to work with you on whatever Congress needs to do, but I think we've got the tools necessary to make sure that we build up this uranium strategy in this country so that we are secure.
Well, that's going to be my follow-up, because it'd be very harmful if DOE takes actions that can make matters worse. So, will you report to this committee about your plans for implementing the Nuclear
Yes,
Fuel
absolutely.
Security Act? Thank you. Just some headlines have been in the paper recently in the last couple of days that the Dominion chief executive expects its peak load to increase at least 5% each year for the next 15 years, and they recognize they're going to need more natural gas in order to keep the lights on. Another article in the Wall Street Journal on April the 30th, Duke Energy reported to regulators that they will need 3 new gas-fired power plants in the Carolinas. Otherwise, they will need to keep the coal plants open. Wall Street Journal article and other papers have been reporting this. Just this week, the International Energy Agency, that U.S. data centers' electricity consumption could rise from 4% in 2022 to 6% in 2026. AI could add 8%. Last December, someone from EPA, when I asked a question as to how much more energy they thought they'd have to have if the president's idea of going all electric by 2035, thought it'd be another 4.5%. I think they were too low. But the question really is, do you believe that this country needs to have more energy or less energy in production?
More energy.
Thank you. Another question that had come up, especially when we were talking with PJM, in 2014, as you might remember, we had a huge polar vortex that went across the Midwest. My district, with a massive amount of manufacturing jobs, we had a situation where, the question was, we were going to go into blackouts or brownouts in the state of Ohio. Fortunately, we're in a situation that all power stations across, in our 2 nuclear power stations in Ohio, everyone was at maximum production. We did not have a brownout or a blackout. Not long after that situation occurred, I'd asked PJM, I said, if we had the same situation today, could we sustain what we did at that point? Because again, with the steel production, float glass, everything that you can't shut down, and they said it wouldn't be a problem. But as the years progressed, we started seeing a little bit change in opinion, because the PJM on their website talks about that there's a need for more power production. When I asked them the same question recently, what would happen if we had the same situation of that polar vortex in 2014? They said, well, we probably could sustain what we have, but when we go into the future, the likelihood we would not be able to do it. So I guess the question really comes down to, are you concerned about all the retiring generation stations we have in the United States today? Because knowing how long it takes to get generation up, especially that base load capacity that we have to have, is so important. But are you concerned about those generation plants
Yeah, thanks
closing?
for the question. It's a really important question. I know that we can get 20 to 100 gigawatts on the existing system just by deploying some of these technologies that we have not availed ourselves of at this moment, that are much faster than having to wait for the building of a new power plant, like reconductoring wires, like virtual power plants, like making sure that we have grid-enhancing technologies. So that's number one. Number two, because of the great work of Congress, that we have now the incentives to put clean power onto the grid, we saw last year 40 gigawatts of additional power added to the nation's electric grid. Another 65 gigawatts are planned to be added this year. So we need to do both. We need to add new power, and baseload power is important, which is why energy storage, again, which was something that didn't exist back during the polar vortex days, is available now through utility-scale grid storage. All of those tools will help to make sure the lights stay on. I will say, though, that the polar vortex is an example of what we're going to continue to get hit with because of climate change, honestly. The number of extreme weather events across the country, Last year, over $1 billion events were 28. It has every single year continued to climb, as we've seen. The events are becoming more frequent and more extreme, and we have an old grid. So there is no doubt that we need to continue to invest in the grid itself, in addition to making sure the generation is there.
Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I'll now go to my friend from Texas, Ms. Fletcher, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for your helpful testimony today, really focused on bipartisan accomplishments and shared goals, as well as just more broadly your leadership in looking to the future and developing policies and programs to ensure that the United States remains the world leader in energy production, in innovation and technology, in emissions reduction, and in exports. This is particularly important to me and the people that I represent in Houston, who have been so glad to welcome you multiple times to our city. It is the energy capital of the world, and we intend to keep it that way. And so before I get to my questions for you, I do want to note that we are seeing in Houston some of the investments and programs that you've been talking about today, from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, from the Inflation Reduction Act, and we're thrilled that the High Velocity Hub in Houston will receive $1.2 billion to expand our hydrogen industry, which, as you know, is really centered in Houston, has the majority or the largest share of hydrogen existing today, and that is growing. I want to circle back to that with my questions, but also just want to note that the DOE loan program with the loan guarantee for Sonova, absolutely transformative. That's headquartered in my district, as well as the 10 Stone and Weber Process Technology that got $200 million for decarbonization in the chemical sector. So these are really important innovations, and I just really want to thank you for your leadership in rolling out these programs so quickly and consistent with kind of the vision of the Congress in making these things happen. I do want to circle back to that, but before I get to that, I do want to address some of the comments that we've heard this morning about what my friends on the other side of the aisle keep calling an LNG ban, and I know that Mr. Pallone touched on it briefly. Mr. Burgess asked about it. I was at the hearing with Chairman Duncan in Port Arthur, Texas, a few weeks ago, and I am certainly hearing concerns from the people who live and work in my district about the prospects for LNG exports and their ability to plan. So I think, following up on some of the other questions, I think it would just be helpful if you could take a minute to share with us your anticipated timeline for DOE's completion of the review.
Yeah, the review should be completed by the end of this year or the beginning of next year, just around that time.
Thank you. That's helpful, I think, for all of us. And then I want to go back to those DOE programs because I do want to ask about the Hydrogen Hub program as well. In February of this year, 7 of the hydrogen hubs wrote a letter to the Treasury Department expressing concerns about the 45V tax credit guidance that Treasury had issued. And in the letter, they said that the hubs are not able to fully materialize, and the hydrogen market isn't going to be able to take off without output from existing sources qualifying for 45V. So I recognize that Treasury is responsible for this guidance and not the Department of Energy, but I would like to know your thoughts on this issue and kind of this concern and how you're working with other departments in the administration to address this and ensure the hub's success.
Yeah, this is, it's a really important question. There's a series of questions that have to be answered in 45V in the guidance, and Treasury is working on that, so I can't say much about it, but suffice it to say that as a whole of government, we want the hubs to be successful.
Well, thank you. I do think it's important to get that guidance from those who are working on it and really incorporate that real-world experience because we also want this to be successful. In the time I have left, I want to associate myself with the comments that Mr. Peters made about the importance of permitting reform. I know you know and understand the importance of that. And earlier today, you mentioned the need to construct, in particular, new hydrogen and CO2 pipelines. When it comes to the development of those pipelines in particular, developers often citing to me and to us that permitting challenges are one of the biggest impediments to deployment. So can you talk a little bit about how DOE intends to work proactively with the permitting agencies to address the challenges in the permitting space when it comes to carbon management?
Yeah, thanks for that. I know some of this is outside of the purview of the Department of Energy because Class 6 wells, pipelines, et cetera, are done by other agencies. However, we do have, again, a whole-of-government approach to getting these projects done. And so it is critical that we see permitting reform that gives, I think a shot clock is really important personally, that causes minds to really focus around a deadline is important. It's important as well that we have one lead agency over these permits so that developers don't have to go to 5 different agencies with 5 different NEPA reviews, et cetera, that we coordinate and use one document, one agency driving these. And that is all what the administration is proposing, is to move it forward. And again, as I was saying to Congressman Peters, it would be great to have the durability of permitting reform from Congress as well, so thank you for working on that.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. I have gone over my time, so I will yield back.
John Lee yields back, and I'll go to Mr. Wahlberg for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. I just came from questioning Undersecretary Sue, so I guess I'm all primed for secretaries. And
All right.
I'm hoping your answers will be fuller and more complete than hers were, so I'm not cursing the project. Under President Biden, the Department of Energy has completely shifted its mission regarding energy security, reliability, and affordability. The department's spending priorities, which sway heavily towards renewables and the administration's overall anti-fossil policies, will increase costs for consumers and crowd out opportunity for expanding nuclear and advanced fossil technologies necessary for American manufacturing resurgence. President Biden says he wants everything made in America, but his environmental and energy policies say opposite. As the chair noted earlier, manufacturing isn't the only thing impacted by these policies. Retail rates for our constituents are also going up significantly, surpassing the rate of inflation. I just have to look at the Wall Street Journal article that found that electricity prices here increased by 30% since 2021, 50% higher than the overall inflation rate. That was the case. Families are paying more, and what are they getting out of it? And so the department has set aside billions for interstate transmission projects that serve the renewable goals of differing states. However, those projects have faced serious delays or have been canceled. By one developer's own admission, the project was not viable. Transmission build-out already necessitates increases in retail rates that everyday Americans have to pay. Madam Secretary, how do you justify those costs as you push build-out based on political goals and not reliability or economics? Beyond that, why should taxpayers pay for these projects that are not viable on their own?
All right. So first, nice to see you. We need to make sure that we have a reliable grid.
Agreed?
Right now, the PUCs across the country are putting onto ratepayers the cost of making that grid reliable, shoring it up. It was built in the 50s and 60s. It is old, and a lot of these utilities go to the PUCs and rate base the upgrades to the grids. One of the things that we had suggested previously, this administration, was to have that be part of an infrastructure project, a national infrastructure project that we take on as a nation to have a reliable grid through, for example, investment tax credits for building up the grid. We don't have that, and so that's why these prices are going up. The president, the administration is obsessed about lowering prices, and that's why the focus has been on what can we do to, in the scheme of things,
We
to
saw
lower
lowering
costs.
prices take place before this administration took
Yes.
office, and they were going down significantly
Because
with
of
greater
COVID.
independence.
You can't complain, you can't compare anything that happens today with what happened 4 years ago, because we were in the middle of a pandemic and everything dropped through the floor. The legitimate comparison is before that. But no doubt, before that, there was still investment in grid, but not as much that is necessary. We need a bigger investment in our national grid, and we need to have it paid for.
Well, that's where promoting the opportunity of the free market, of our private sectors, to do the jobs that they're capable of doing without the excessive regulation and, I would say respectfully, interference from the federal government That just isn't working.
Well, that's why tax credits are a great thing, because they are government-enabled but private sector-led, and we operate in partnership.
And
with the
taxpayer
private
supported.
sector. Yes, of course.
Taxpayer funded.
The infrastructure that we need, the roads we drive on, the
Let me jump
transmission
in one
wires
other thing.
are paid for by the taxpayers.
The EV mandate that we have, jumping to that area, and the grid security, which you've mentioned, based on the success of the IRA and IIJA, as well as the dependence on consumer restricting solutions like managed charging, forgive me if I'm skeptical of those two entities. The White House also estimated that these laws would help build 500,000 EV charging stations by 2030. In the last 2 years, they built 7. How are we going to complete that? And what does that mean to the citizen?
So, number one, we are at 171,000 charging stations, largely driven by the private sector at the moment, and the goal is to get to 500,000. What the electric vehicle initiative was doing, the NEVI, National Electric Vehicle, was to give funding to the states to be able to fill in the gaps where the private sector has not gone. And in order to do that, that means that a charging station is going somewhere where it has not been before, where there may not be electricity, because they're filling in a gap. And so that means-
7 gaps.
well,
the
but,
500,000.
no, but here's the thing, is that it takes 18 months on average to get the electricity, the planning, and the permitting for one charging station. So now all of them all of them have gotten their money. I have got 35 states that have released solicitations for the installation of
Let's reduce all that time.
21 states that
I'm
have
well
announced
over, and I
awards.
will
And
yield
it's all
back.
at the states, and, continue to press on all of your governors and your offices to make those happen quickly.
Gentleman's time's expired. Now we'll go to Ms. Matsui for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Madam Secretary. Every year, I lead efforts in the House to support robust funding for DOE clean vehicle programs, like the Vehicle Technologies Office and the Loan Programs Office Advanced Technology Vehicles Manufacturing Program. These programs are helping to drive innovation in zero-emission vehicles and finance a new boom in American auto manufacturing. I was glad to see increased funding for both of these programs in the President's FY25 budget. These programs, in combination with the Inflation Reduction Act, provide much-needed support for domestic manufacturing of vehicles and vehicle batteries, including tax credits for consumers looking to buy American-made cars and incentives for manufacturers looking to build or expand factories in the U.S. Madam Secretary, can you describe how DOE is supporting American auto manufacturing and how the Inflation Reduction Act is creating good-paying jobs across the country?
I'm so delighted to answer that question, because it is working. And thank you so much for your support and your leadership in electric vehicles and batteries. So the goal is to get the electric vehicle made here, and the battery made here, and the guts to the battery made here, meaning the full supply chain. So in a battery, there's an anode, a cathode, some separator material, and electrolyte, and there's critical minerals. All of those are pieces to the supply chain. All of those are the things that are coming back to the United States to be manufactured here. We have now 400 companies that have announced they are expanding in either EVs or batteries in the United States, in pockets all across the country. In places, I know she's not here, but in Moses Lake, Washington, there are 4 EV battery that never existed before. It is, every place is benefiting from the incentives that are embedded in the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law to get that manufacturing back home and to have us compete with our economic adversaries across the world.
Thank you very much. Over the last 10 years, we've seen incredible technological changes in the vehicle market. The cost of EV batteries has plummeted by more than 80%, and there are now over 30 EV models in the U.S. with over 300 miles of range. How is DOE working to support innovation in vehicle batteries, and how would that innovation impact the price of EVs?
Yeah, innovation is critical. Obviously, we have 17 national labs, and a good number of them are focused on reducing the price and looking at EV batteries and looking at the research into substitute materials for the critical minerals that may cause the prices to be higher. We know that range has significantly expanded, and as you noted, the price has dropped significantly, all because of research and development that is done by DOE labs or our partners in the private sector. So that investment is benefiting citizens enormously, because now the price of driving an EV compared to an internal combustion engine is astonishing. If you fill up, because of these new batteries, if you fill up your tank, your average tank, it costs you about $45. If you drive an EV the same amount of time and you plug it in at home, it costs you $15. If you use a fast charger, it may cost you up to $30. But either way, you are saving huge amounts of money on operating that vehicle because of the technology that's embedded in these next generation batteries.
Thank you. Representative Blunt Rochester and I lead efforts to support funding for a range of DOE energy efficiency programs. Energy efficiency not only saves Americans money, it is also essential for meeting our growing energy needs. Many utilities across the country are projecting significant load growth in the near future, but energy efficiency can and should play a significant role in blunting the demand. How is the Building Technologies Office working to improve efficiency and reduce energy demand?
Yeah, a number of ways they are doing that. Number one is to do, again, research into materials that you can build a building with that reduce your energy use or that generate energy. Number one. Number two, the technologies through our Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office that focuses on conservation standards or energy efficiency standards have saved taxpayers over $2 trillion, I want to say $3 trillion by 2030 as a result of the technologies, again, that the private sector and labs across the country have come up with to respond to these higher goals of more efficiency. So the combination of policy and innovation and technology has created a huge benefit for the American consumer.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Generally yields back. I now go to the chair of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, Mr. Griffith, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, I represent one of the most economically stressed congressional districts in the country. Average household income is just barely over $50,000. That's household income, not individual. My people are hurting, and they're hurting because, in large measure, high energy costs. And it's not just gasoline. A lot of times when people hear that, they think it's the gas at the pump. It's also electricity. The utilities are constantly asking for rate increases, and I'm getting constant complaints about it. And the reason that they're asking for those rate increases is in part because of they're switching at the behest of DOE and EPA. They're switching to more expensive fuels. They're switching away from coal and natural gas to wind and solar. And at the same time, the ratepayers are still having to pay, those same people who are out there struggling and working hard, they're having to pay for facilities that were built 20 years ago with a 50-year life expectancy, or 30 years ago with a 50-year life expectancy, and those facilities are still costing. The stranded assets of the utilities still have to be paid for, and the ratepayers are paying it, but they don't have the money to. I know it's not just DOE requirements, I know it's EPA too, so I don't want to be unfair. But if you were sitting in my shoes, what would you tell the people of the 9th Congressional District of Virginia when they call you up and tell you they can't afford to pay their electric bill at their house anymore?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I totally sympathize with this, especially with folks who have, who have lower incomes and trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet, and the utility bill keeps going up. You were out of the room, but I was describing one of the main reasons for this is because we have a terribly old grid, and these utilities are wanting to rate base the price of upgrading the transmission lines and the grid and the distribution lines and the distribution transformers, et cetera. The price of the renewable energy is actually cheaper. I mean, solar is the cheapest form of energy right now, cheaper than coal, cheaper than natural gas. Natural gas is very low, but it tells you that natural gas is super low right now, the price of natural gas, but the price of energy bills have not come down, even though we rely heavily on natural gas for 40% of our energy mix. So it tells you that there's something else is going on.
But
And a lot of that,
you would agree, it's not just the grid, it's having to buy new sources of energy, and to get that new source of energy to the grid is different than the old baseload power plants that use natural gas or coal, because they have to be more dispersed around the countryside. And as a result of that, that's part, not the only reason, but part of the reason for the grid increase. And then the fact that they're still paying for that fossil fuel power electric generation that was built 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but still has 20, 30 years of life expectancy. And because of regulations from the federal government, not just DOE, again, I don't want to say it's all of yours, but because of that, that's a big chunk of why the prices are going up. Even if solar is cheaper over a long, and I dispute that or don't agree to that today, but we'll talk about that another time. But even if I accept that principle, they're having to invest, the utility companies are having to invest in all new facilities when they have perfectly good facilities that the ratepayers are already paying for, correct?
So natural gas is not affected, existing natural gas plants is not affected by the EPA rule. So that EPA rule does not touch natural gas plants. On coal plants, it requires, in 5 years, technology of carbon capture to be installed so they are not polluting. Many of the coal plants that have shut down because they just are not finding it financially viable for them. And they've chosen to close down because it is not something, people aren't demanding coal.
It's not financially viable because of government regulations. Now, let me just say this, because it's something that that I think about. Not everywhere in my district, but there's large parts of my district where people have coal in their backyards. Mm-hmm. We even had a member of this committee one time who owned a house with a coal mine in the basement. When the prices get high enough, they're going to find a way to heat their home. It's going to be wood most likely in most of my district, or it's going to be coal. But one of the problems that I think that sometimes the administration has a hard time understanding is people are going to figure out a way to heat their homes, hopefully safely, but not always the case. And when you don't have any other choice, when you don't have the money to pay that big bill, and that might be fine for the rich folks, but that's not fine for the people I represent. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Granholm, thank you and the department for all of your work to implement the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act. I can truly state that you and the other leaders at the agency and the employees are devoted, consummate professionals, and it's much appreciated. We know that if these historic funds are invested effectively, they will have a major impact on making us a stronger, cleaner, and more competitive economy. One of the greatest and often overlooked benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act is that it will save Americans considerable amounts of money. And one of the ways that consumers will experience those savings most directly is through 2 new rebate programs, which will be administered through state governments. I'm so proud that New York State and NYSERDA were the first in the country to be approved for these funds. So, Secretary Granholm, people may have a hard time wrapping their heads around a $158 million opportunity. So maybe you can help. When New Yorkers see reports that they will soon be able to access rebates for electric appliances and other energy-efficient home upgrades, can you tell us what it will mean for those consumers?
Yeah, thank you so much, and thanks to New York for stepping up and being the example for the rest of the states. We've got a number of states who are in the pipeline looking at what New York has done, and New York consumers will be able to access rebates for things like heat pumps or induction stoves or insulation or efficient windows or efficient doors, in addition to being able to access tax credits for generating energy, like for solar panels, which is I wanted to sort of kick back to Representative Griffith's point about people not having options, but actually because of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, particularly for people of modest means, the ability to install solar, the ability to generate your own energy at home for very minimal price and gives you energy security is one thing that consumers all across the country can take advantage of. These 2 programs, both one's called Here and one's called Homes, but the bottom line is they both ensure that citizens, no matter what your income bracket, actually can take advantage of rebates and make your home more efficient. So it's very exciting. Up to $1,700 for a home if you want to install these efficient equipment, and that can save up to 30% on your energy bills.
Wonderful. And I understand that each state's program will operate a little differently, but can you tell us how a state might choose to run this program?
Yeah, this is all being funded through the state energy offices, so every state can organize it in a way that best suits them. New York had an advantage because they already had a program set up, so it enabled them to sort of build into their existing rebate program. But what we expect is that, particularly for home appliances, either the installer who comes to your home will give you a discount at the point of installation, or if you buy your appliance at a Lowe's or at an appliance warehouse, that you will get that rebate at the point of sale. But the bottom line is it takes money off at the point where you're required to pay, so it makes it a little easier. There's another program that gives you a tax credit, so those who have incomes high enough to be able to have tax liability can take advantage of that at tax time. But for most people, it will be at the point of sale.
And what's the best way for consumers to find out about whether they're eligible for these rebates?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to our website, energy.gov/save, and it will tell you what you are eligible for. And we encourage people to do that no matter what state you live in.
Super, and I look forward to working with the agency and getting the word out to New Yorkers. And the budget that the president proposed also would have funds to help oversee these rebates, along with weatherization assistance programs and state energy programs. How important is that administrative funding to support this network?
Well, clearly, we want to make sure that, first of all, people are aware of the programs and that they are administered well. So we appreciate the fact that there has been additional administrative funds granted in the '24 budget for these programs. And if we want them to work well, you have to have the people to be able to make sure that taxpayers are protected, but also that taxpayers take advantage of it.
Right, and we know critical minerals, on another topic, are foundational to our clean energy transition, especially for batteries. Yesterday, Congressman Garrett Graves and I introduced new bipartisan legislation called the Critical Materials Trace Act, which would have DOE support the development of digital identifiers for clean energy technologies to enable accurate reporting of each product's critical mineral components, their sources, and their manufacturing history. The private sector and the EU have been leading the way in this sort of development, often referred to as battery passports. So, Secretary, can DOE and MESC play a role here in ensuring critical mineral supply chains are secure and sourced in an ethical,
Yes, absolutely, and we look
manner?
forward to working with you on that important piece of legislation.
Great, so we'll be in contact with the agency, but again, thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now go to the Chair of the Health Subcommittee, Mr. Guthrie, for 5 minutes.
Hey, thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. Appreciate you being here. Last time you were here, it's hard to remember from a year ago, but I remember we talked about EV and the EV mandates coming forward. And I know, being the former governor of Michigan, I have great appreciation for the American automotive industry moving forward. And my concern was before that the EV mandates are just going to make inefficient the automotive industry. For example, after the Inflation Reduction Act, Ford Motor Company, and we're proud did, made a decision to build 2 battery plants in my district. Now that the market's kind of moving forward, they're going to go forward with, they're finishing both, or the shell of both, but going to go forward with one. It's just that, and you hear dealers talk about people just don't want the cars now. And the issue is, and I know that your experience and Jim Farley from Ford had experience of just having access to batteries, battery charging. And so this gets to my question is, every time we bring up, we're going to go to electric cars mandate, but we don't have enough charging. We don't have enough lithium. We don't have it, and all this stuff, we just get called naysayers in the system. But they're real issues for real people when they make decisions whether or not to buy a car. We can call us naysayers, but if I'm somebody wants to buy an electric car, I got to figure out how far can I go on it, and it does factor into them. But I understand EPA is moving forward with the rule. I know that's EPA, but as Secretary of Energy, Director of the overall Transportation Energy Strategy, are you concerned that we're moving too fast with EVs? Given a year later, we now see that, some of our automotive companies have made decisions not to build out as much as they had predicted they would last year. I
am not concerned that we are moving too fast. Yes, we are seeing in fact, a great uptake in EVs. There's a 30% increase year over year, which I think any automaker would be happy to have. But we also know that as new products come online, you got to make sure that the ecosystem surrounding them makes people comfortable. And so that's why the charging infrastructure is so very important, and we're working on that. That's why making sure we've got long range in the batteries is very important, and we're working on that. So if we can get a 300-mile-plus battery and have that vehicle be affordable, this is why the Inflation Reduction Act reduced
Well, if
the
you could have a
prices.
300-mile battery with it affordable and charging stations, that would probably, but I'll tell you, if you talk to car dealers, they say they can't sell them. They just absolutely can't sell them, and that's the concern. I do think people are going to buy electric cars as we move into the future. They're actually a pretty good product, but forcing it to happen as quickly as is happening without the market deciding that is one of the issues. But the other thing is, we do have to have the minerals. And Benchmark Mineral Intelligence estimates that 380 new mines are needed over the next decade to meet EV and other clean energy technologies. And what is the DOE working with the Biden administration to make sure we have permits, the ability to mine?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, just yesterday, the Loan Program Office announced that it was open for business for mining, for extraction, for those who want to be able to do that, which is very important. And they
We have to get them permitted. Yeah, we have to get them.
Well, no, and the permitting, I mean, we've been talking about that over here with Representative Peters about the importance of permitting. And I would say as well, the importance of updating the Mining Act, which would make that all much more easy. We can do sustainable mining in this country, but our act and our permitting has been woefully behind the scenes. So
Yeah, permitting reform.
would be great.
You're right.
Would be great for. That's a good to do on your list.
That's a good, permitting reform, I agree with you on that as well. And I'm sorry I had to step out for another meeting, but you talked about, we need to update our poles and our transmission, our poles, power, transformers and so forth. But also our power generation is important. And, my concern, I know DOE entered a MOU with EPA, and there's a lot of letters there, to address reliability risk from EPA's actions. But the real concern is, I've had people who are in the power industry, you say we're having increase in demand and we're not permitting, we're not creating enough generation to move forward, but we're also taking generation out, like plants that have useful life out because of people don't like their source of generation. So the question is, how can we ensure that we have ample supply of power as we move forward in terms of generation? And the question is, should we be taking, I guess the question would be this, should we be taking plants with useful life out of production now that we know that we need more demand, there's more demand coming?
Yeah. Number one, the EPA rule does not touch natural gas plants. Existing natural gas plants are not.
But there are also cogeneration plants too. So we still have cogeneration plants. Yeah.
Yes, but on the coal side, if it is got life ahead of it, it can exist with carbon capture technology. And there's ways to be able to finance that carbon capture technology so that that has life. But I will say that the Inflation Reduction Act has incentivized a huge amount of generation as well, including 40 gigawatts last year that came online, 81% of which was clean, solar, 60 gigawatts projected this year coming online. And in addition to that, these tools that I was discussing before you were here, tools like reconductoring and virtual power plants and storage and grid-enhancing technologies can also add 100 gigawatts to the system. We just issued a grid
I'm out of
liftoff
time.
report.
I know he said, so thanks for your answer, but I'm out
you
of
bet.
time. Thank you. Thanks.
Gentleman's time's expired. Now go to Dr. Scharf, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair Duncan, and thank you so much, Secretary Granholm, for being here today. I want to first give you just a big thank you and shout out for recognizing the Pacific Northwest's potential for a hydrogen hub ripe with the opportunity to develop a robust industry for the alternative fuel that will prove extremely important for hard-to-decarbonize sectors such as heavy-duty vehicles, and also for baseload and emergency generation as the energy grid variability and disruptions become increasingly common. The hydrogen hub will allow the Pacific Northwest to produce the greenest hydrogen fuel in the entire nation. Today, I want to discuss a pressing issue that's top of mind for every utility across the district, certainly in my district, and that is the transformer shortage that we continue to see across the U.S. Just last September, I spoke with Assistant DOE Secretary Jean Rodriguez about the problems that the supply shortfall is causing, and I asked what DOE is doing to alleviate that shortage. And I was really encouraged by the Assistant Secretary's talk of collaboration with industry and working with them to incentivize industry to share units between utilities and create more universal standards for transformers so they could have interoperability. So I'm aware of DOE's efforts at this point, but we're now 8 months out from that discussion. The picture has generally stayed the same. My office recently checked in with the specific public utility district that I mentioned last time, and while their inventory has gotten a little bit better, their supply has not even come close to meeting demand. So the lack of access has forced utilities to delay or even cancel projects. Affordable housing projects are being canceled right when our housing inventory is low and prices are skyrocketing. And it also makes our existing infrastructure more vulnerable in case of storms, wildfires that occur in the Northwest. In fact, during Hurricane Katrina, just as an example, the affected states lost 12,600 transformers, and so utilities always need to have these on hand just in case. The damage or failure of a single LPT, the large ones, can take down an entire substation, and in my own district, we recently had vandalism, an attack on these, and thousands of people celebrated Christmas in the dark. So this continues to come up with the utilities in my district. The GAE has said that DOE has done important work, but I'm wondering, just to speed things along, has DOE re-examined all possible options and developed a rapid implementation strategy?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And this has clearly been a huge problem, not just in your district, but across the country, getting access to distribution transformers. 3 things. One, we had proposed a rule on distribution transformers with respect to efficiency. We have gotten feedback, we have reevaluated that, and put out a new rule that encourages the distribution transformers and the full supply chain to be made in the United States. Number 2, we have set up, and I'm sure that our Assistant Secretary Rodriguez was talking about how we had set up a Tiger team to identify where the pinch points were. And because of that, a lot of his workforce, some of it was making sure that we had the right supply chain, et cetera. So we have focused on that through our Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chain Office. We just gave out an $18 million grant under 48C to Siemens to do large power transformers in the United States, which is great. There are 3 companies that have announced that they are now expanding and building transformer factories in the United States, in addition to Siemens, Eaton, and Prolec. So we're encouraged by that. So we're hopefully going to start to see some loosening of the system so that utilities are able to access what we need.
Thank you. We actually, in this committee, asked for a little bit of a delay in the requirement for these to be only manufactured in the U.S. simply because of this crisis. So I guess I would just, in my limited time, just encourage, whatever we can do to give financial assistance, technical assistance, to get these manufactured here. And as my colleagues submit funding requests, let's make sure that is one of the ones that is included. I wanted to just, in my last 14 seconds, just thank you for funding our national labs. They are doing so much of the work that will relieve a lot of our concerns about sourcing from foreign countries and being able to manufacture the batteries of the future right here, among other things. So thank you from PNNL. I yield back.
Julie yields back. I'll now go to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Bouchon, Dr. Bouchon for 5 minutes.
Secretary, thanks for being here. I just want to say at the outset, touting all these federal grants, trillions of dollars going out the door, that's great, except for the fact that when people in my district go to the grocery store, they can't afford their food and they can't afford their energy costs, and inflation is a huge problem. That's been driven primarily, in my view, in the post-COVID era by some of the legislation that was passed without a single Republican vote. And my district people know this, honestly, the government handing out money to a select few people doesn't make everybody else happy when inflation's through the roof. I really appreciate your time, but since you last testified, we've continued to see some of the debilitating effects of the administration's rush to green. Like many of us here, I'm strongly supportive of an all-of-the-above approach to energy. It ensures affordability, reliability, resilience. I support renewables. I support EVs. Unfortunately, the current trajectory we're on is going to be, we're on a crash course to increase of grid overloads and blackouts and brownouts. And that's just not my opinion, this is the facts. As we move forward to the digital age, and pivoting a little bit, Indiana is emerging as a major Midwest tech hub and a current leader in microelectronics technology. Currently, Indiana has a multitude of new projects in the pipeline, many of which are data centers that are projected to require an additional 7 gigawatts of energy to be fully operational. This is a nationwide issue. This increased need for energy amounts to almost 10% of Indiana's current grid capacity. I believe you cannot ensure reliability and resiliency with wind and solar alone. It just cannot be done. We need an all-the-above approach: nuclear, fossil, hydro, renewables. So my question is, what's the plan at the Department of Energy, not to just maintain the status quo, but if we do things like grow our technology industry or we transition to all EVs, the increased demand that we have for energy as we're actually decreasing our ability to produce baseload power, people say EVs alone, if you go to that totally, 30% increase in the grid, demand on the grid, some estimates. What's our plan to not only maintain the status quo, but how are we going to increase the power that we need when we're at the same time taking off a lot of our base power out of the system?
First of all, it is an issue about how we can both increase demand and increase efficiency and make sure that we're still feeding the power to all of these new manufacturing facilities. I think Indiana has 22 of them just in the past few years, you know, a lot of which are for clean energy products. So that's fantastic, but they're going to require additional power, as are the AI, the data centers, et cetera. We also know, though, that we have the tools within our disposal to be able to manage the increase. One is that we are incentivizing additional generation. And when you combine renewable with batteries, it becomes baseload-like. And we want to incentivize nuclear, clearly. We want to make sure these new data centers, for example, maybe they aren't permitted unless they come with an SMR or something like that on the local level, to think about them bringing it rather than socializing those costs across the rate base. So those tools are in our disposal. You talk about electric vehicles. There's no mandate, but there is an uptake in electric vehicles. The batteries for those electric vehicles and the batteries associated with distributed energy resources in homes can create a virtual power plant. If we are smart about how we move power and how we gather and how we compensate people for the ability to access that power, that is a whole nother resource that we had not had in the past. So all of these tools can get us to a reliable.
Well, we're thinking about it. That's the point.
For sure.
Right? Okay. The EVs they're more popular in DC, LA, New York City, and other places. Southwest Indiana, not so much. So I'd encourage you to go to rural America and talk to them about the infrastructure challenges that we have with EVs. People want them, but they potentially, but there's just no infrastructure in place. You can't do it. I want to talk about carbon capture, and I know in 2021, the IIJA established within the DOE a carbon dioxide transport infrastructure finance and innovation program. I got that out. Authorized $2.1 billion for low-interest loans and grants. Carbon dioxide pipeline infrastructure is essential for meaningful deployment of CCUS technology, carbon capture. Yet we have seen that CO2 pipeline projects have been stalled across the nation. Have we given out any grants at all? Can you report loan programs, office disbursement of any funding to support CO2 infrastructure?
Loan Program Office, have they done any of that? I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I am not sure that they have actually focused on CO2 infrastructure. However, to your point, we need CO2 infrastructure. There's no doubt about that. And we also need, as we've discussed on this committee, permitting reform to make sure these are happening quickly. It's CO2 infrastructure. It's also hydrogen pipeline infrastructure.
I understand. And if you would get back to the committee on, you know, the authorization of $2.1 billion in loans to support this infrastructure and what we've done so far, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Gentleman's time's expired. I'll now go to Florida's Ms. Castor for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Madam Secretary. Thank you for all that you're doing to bring cleaner, cheaper energy to our neighbors back home. It's so gratifying to see the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act passed in the last Congress really delivering for our neighbors back home. Cheaper energy through renewables or energy efficiency or being able to weatherize their homes. So thank you. It was difficult for me to keep up with your opening statement on, and it's been difficult to keep up with the announcements on clean energy manufacturing opening up. So can you go through those again? Did you say 600 new clean energy projects over the last,
Yeah.
Is that?
Since the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, 600 factories, 400 of those involving EVs or batteries, but 600 factories, is that right? 600 factories, for sure, in this clean energy space and opening up in all pockets of the country.
An attraction of private investment.
Attracting private investment, of course, because these factory announcements, this is separate from the Department of Energy funded. These are from the Inflation
Congressman
Reduction
Peters
Act.
said $649 billion in private investment.
Huge, because there's a 30% tax credit, and then the private sector comes in and puts in their amount. So there's massive investment.
So these are good-paying
happening
jobs all across America.
all across America.
Bolstering our supply chains. So when I hear some of my friends across the aisle say, this is helping China, is this helping China?
No, China's, I think, very upset that we are doing this to attract all of the components of the supply chains here. Now, China had a huge footprint, right, on particularly the critical minerals and the processing of them for batteries. And so we have been very aggressive about trying to get those components back in the United States. And it's work. We have to continue to work at it. But the bottom line is China sees a threat.
They sure do. And Ranking Member Pallone says the Republicans are misleading the public. I would just call this a whopper. It's a whopper of misleading the public. And in fact, just yesterday, a company visited me here in Washington and said that they are going to open a manufacturing plant for solar in the Sunshine State, which is welcome. It was 1,700 jobs, which is welcome. I've also listened to some of my colleagues talk about the price spikes, and as a matter of fact, on the front page of my hometown paper this morning, the Tampa Bay Times, they say, why Florida electric bills skyrocketed recently. Here's why. You know what they say? It's because of the exorbitant price of frack gas. Florida, you'd think, as the Sunshine State, would be reliant on solar power, the abundant, free power of the sun. But you know, our utilities rely on frack gas. 75% of our electricity generation comes from frack gas. So what this analysis says is that the utilities, of course, passed along those price spikes to consumers. From 2020 to 2022, price of gas more than doubled, an increase that the Economic Forecasting Center called incredible. It's alarming to just see these prices keep rising markedly the last couple of years. It's like an apocalypse. And then as gas prices have come down, the utilities haven't really passed along the savings. Meanwhile, they're slow-walking investments in solar. The state of Florida is not passing along rebates for for energy efficiency. They're slow-walking weatherization. What does that mean to consumers that are struggling with, by the way, the hottest temperatures ever last summer in July and August, so they have to run their air conditioning bills?
Yeah, thank you so much for your leadership on the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, because they really are providing consumers with options to be able to make their lives affordable, at least on the energy side. If you can install solar panels, and if you're low enough income, for example, on weatherization, you might have solar panels installed so you can generate your own, in addition to saving energy because of installed efficient appliances and insulation. Thank you for 10
Can I, since my time is limited, and I get so worked up over this, as you can tell, but the grid liftoff report also highlighted some of the barriers across the country that Congressman Peters talked about, yes, in permitting, but just
just this outdated structure where you have states that are making critical decisions and throwing up barriers. Are you able to work with states and RTOs and others to really get the gets onto the grid and help them with increasing line rating and delivering cost savings?
A lot of them, but some of them no. Some of them are not, it's new, and so utilities, of course, are risk averse.
I think I understand that in the so-called Sunshine State. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record this newspaper story, Florida electric bill skyrocketed recently. Here's why. For the
Without
record.
objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I yield back.
John Lay's time's expired, and I'll go to Mr. Curtis for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, great to have you here. I'd like to first of all give you a shout out for your work with me and the Conservative Climate Caucus for visiting us and realizing that we have a lot of things in common. I'll just suggest that I think we can all agree we're looking for affordable, reliable, clean power. We want the U.S. to lead on that. Let me talk today about a subject that's important to all of us: nuclear energy, and how do we get this rolling. I have a bill. It's called the Advanced Nuclear Reactor Prize Act. Waives the fees for first movers to help them successfully license and deploy. I'm extremely excited about the potential of our next generation nuclear, and have seen firsthand the difficulties. We had an agency in Utah called UAMPS, conglomeration of cities trying to get a small nuclear reactor. They were about 10 years into it, halfway through the permitting process, $100 million into it, and just had to walk away from it. And I think we can all agree that we've got to figure out, right, how to make that not happen. And my bill would fix this in part by authorizing you, the Secretary of Energy, to make targeted awards to cover regulatory costs of the first new nuclear technologies that are licensed and operational. And I'm wondering if you could talk for just a minute about how you see incentivizing nuclear and how do we get this thing rolling?
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for voting for the '24 budget, which did some of that for small modular reactors. I think there was $1 billion in there for $800 million for the reactors, and then some workforce funding as well. Super important, but $800 million may not cover a full suite of 6-pack or 10-pack of small modular reactors, and no utility wants to be the first of a kind. They want to be the nth of a kind, and so the question is, how do we bundle them together to make the situation like UAMPS not happen again? UAMPS, of course, involved an advanced nuclear reactor, and the Congress has been very generous in supporting a couple of those as well. You know, we have to recognize that nuclear technology as clean baseload power is very important to our energy mix. It currently occupies 20%, almost 20% of our overall energy supply, and we need more. But we also have to make sure that we continue to drive the prices down, the expense of that, the capital expense of the first ones. And this is why I think the combination of the data centers combined with some of these SMRs together give both the technology companies who have some funding, and not you giving technology companies funding. Technology companies have the funding and can afford to be able to do some of those small modular reactors in partnership with their data centers so that they're not pulling from the grid. Bottom line is, nuclear is a very important piece of things. The nuclear, the uranium funding that was just approved yesterday in the Senate, hugely important to be able to create a uranium strategy, a HALEU strategy for these next generation reactors. Thank you for your leadership.
A little bit of what you're explaining is not a few nuclear reactors, but a number of them, and I think we can all agree in this room, we want U.S. to lead.
Yes.
Right on that. We don't want to lose that to overseas. Let's talk about just permitting reform in general for a minute. I think we can all see that permitting reform is this huge obstacle to where we're going. I want to brag about Utah for a minute. I mean, almost every energy source that you could imagine, and even storage of that in Utah. And yet, everybody keeps coming to me, as they probably do to you, we can't get these permitted. And I realize a lot of this is outside of the scope of DOE, but you do invest in many of these technologies that will someday be deployed to scale. And how does permitting reform have an enabling effect on your projects? And what can you say to us about how we move forward on this permitting reform issue?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate Congress's willingness in a bipartisan fashion to at least continue to work on that. In the meantime, this administration is trying to do what it can from an administrative point of view. So we just passed a rule that allows for us to have a 2-year cap on permitting for transmission on public lands. It's called SITAP. I'm excited about that, announced that in Utah, as a matter of fact. We're pleased about being able to move forward how we can. But having a shot clock like that embedded in law, I think would be important because it organizes people. The ability to have one office be the point person for projects as opposed to having developers go to multiple offices is an important step that would be helpful in law. It's certainly what we're trying to do on the administrative side. The ability to make sure that we have categorical exclusions in already developed areas for the development of generation. Those kinds of things are very important. It's what we're trying to do as an administration, but it would be great to have it in law.
And I'm sorry we're out of time, but would love to continue to work with you on all of those things. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. I'll now recognize Mr. Sarbanes for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Granholm, you will not be surprised to hear that I think you're doing a terrific job. I want to thank you for all your work from the outset. And in particular today, just talking about the amazing progress the Department of Energy is making in implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. It's really good stuff. These investments are critical to strengthening our domestic energy profile and fortify our overall energy and national security interests in the larger global marketplace, as you know. Given the precarious state of global energy markets and the impact that global conflicts such as the war in Ukraine, which you've talked about, have had on energy security, it is critically important we continue work in partnership with our allies to explore clean energy solutions and think carefully about our broad energy future. The Department of Energy, as you're well aware, has done an excellent job of working in tandem with international partners to achieve our clean energy goals. And one example of this is the implementation of the U.S.-Israel Energy Center. I wondered if you could speak about the accomplishments of the U.S.-Israel Energy Center and the importance of reauthorizing the center.
Yeah, thanks for that. Between the BIRD Energy Program and the U.S.-Israel Energy Center, which recently met at DOE headquarters for their first in-person executive meeting. We welcomed over 40 members of the committee, the executive committee, the various consortia to meet with projects. It is critical that we continue to forge partnerships on technology and on advances and on entrepreneurship and on ways and learn from one another. And between BIRD and the U.S.-Israel Energy Center, those two mechanisms of ensuring that we get the best ideas going in both directions is very important. Israel's got obviously huge expertise in things like smart agriculture and in batteries and in all the things that we are focused on as well, given that they're so in an area that's sensitive to not having to use fossil fuels from neighbors that may not be in their camp, I'll just say.
Yeah.
So we can learn a lot from each other.
Thanks very much. And building off the success of the U.S.-Israel Energy Center, you know that Congress enacted a few years back the Bipartisan Eastern Mediterranean Security and Energy Partnership Act. That was in 2019. It authorized the U.S. Eastern Mediterranean Energy Center, a similar center for energy research and collaboration, in this case with Cyprus, Greece, and Israel, so very much modeled after the U.S.-Israel Energy Center, which it's a terrific opportunity, this new one, to assemble many key partners around these critical issues. In DOE's own words, this center will, quote, strengthen the region's energy security, bring economic growth for countries across the region, deepen geopolitical ties among participating governments, and open commercial opportunities for U.S. companies. That's a quote from a concept paper that I know the department has developed. I know there's another concept paper, kind of a revised one in the works right now. Could you explain the Department of Energy's plans for the United States Eastern Mediterranean Center, I call it the East Med Center, and how the department's preparations will allow you to establish the center once resources are appropriated, which we're working on feverishly here to make sure that there is funding in place for this initiative.
Yeah, thank you so much for your leadership on that, making sure that we can do it. I mean, this is, of course, forging ties between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Egypt. Critical area, critical for us to be able to share ideas, again, on energy security. And as we all know, with these multi-country centers like that, the benefit is because we are able to share researchers, to be able to cross-pollinate universities and research labs, and that's exactly what this would be doing. We're excited to continue working with you on it and hopefully get the funding for it.
Great. Well, I look forward to that as well, and working with my colleagues, including on this committee, Congressman Bill Arakis. We're very keen on advancing this center and getting it stood up. It's an important bipartisan priority. Again, thank you for all the terrific work that you're doing at the department. I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary, for being here. I want to ask you about the Energy Policy and Conservation Act and changes in appliance efficiency mandates. Specifically, yes or no, do you agree that appliance regulations should be technologically feasible?
Yes.
And yes or no, do you agree that appliance regulations should not increase net costs for consumers?
Yes.
Yes or no, do you agree that appliance regulation should save a significant amount of energy?
Yes.
Efficiency mandates increase the upfront cost of appliances, which can really hurt low-income families and renters who do not have the luxury of waiting years for the energy savings to break even. Yes or no, do you agree that 3 years is a reasonable payback period for efficiency regulations?
I think it depends. I think it depends.
And if it's not 3 years, how long do you think the American people should have to wait for a DOE efficiency mandate to save money?
Well, I think ideally you'd like it to actually have that payback in the first year if it's possible, but it may not be in the first year. That's why the benefit of having what Congress passed on these efficiency rebates gives people the ability to reduce their costs immediately and buy a more efficient appliance that allows them to save money over the course of time. And, these efficiency rules have saved the standards have saved consumers more than $2 trillion by 2030. So it's a really important way of reducing costs for people.
Thank you. And so I would love for it to be a payback in 1 year too, but I'll settle for 3 years. But yesterday you finalized a rule, DOE did, on gas-fired storage water heaters, and the payback is 9.1 years. That seems like an awful long time to get paid back for the upfront costs. I want to move on to another question. The Biden administration has committed the United States to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and is spending trillions of taxpayer dollars to try to achieve it. Secretary Granholm, do you believe the United States has a credible path to meet its net zero greenhouse gas emission goals?
Yes.
And Secretary Granholm, in 2022, the United Nations released a report detailing the possibility of reaching the Paris Climate Agreement's goal of achieving both net zero by 2050 and temperatures not rising over 1.5 degrees Celsius. The report states, quote, current policies do not trace a credible path from 2030 towards the achievement of national net zero targets. The UN report also states, quote, existing policies point to a 2.8 degrees Celsius increase in temperatures by the end of the century. And a 2023 Congressional Research Service report states, quote, none of the modeled scenarios indicate that the United States could meet its 2030 greenhouse gas emissions targets. In fact, no signatory of the Paris Climate Agreement is anywhere near a pathway to achieve their net zero pledges. However, it appears that John Kerry and the Biden administration continue to say these goals are achievable. Why is it that the UN report and the Congressional Research Service reports say one thing and the Biden administration and yourself say another?
I missed the date on the UN report.
It was 2022.
Yeah, that was, first of all, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law have given enormous wind in our sails to be able to meet these goals. So our modeling shows that we will have a 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. That's from those two bills alone. That does not account for what the private sector is doing, what other state and local governments are doing. We think we can get to 50%, which is the goal by 2030. We also think and are very bullish about the next 30 years being able to, next 20 years being able to look at the technology advances that we are seeing. We do think that there is a credible path to be able to get to net zero by 2050, and we're working every day to achieve it.
Well, I hope you're right, but a lot of the evidence doesn't show that. And other competing reports say the opposite, because we're spending trillions of dollars, of taxpayer dollars on this. Thank you, and I yield back.
Generally yields back, and I'll go to Mr. Cardenas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Duncan, and also Ranking Member DeGette for holding this very important budget hearing. And I'd also like to thank Secretary Granholm for your service that you've rendered not only to the American people, to the benefit of the entire world when the United States finally decided to get back on track with addressing climate change issues that we can control here in the United States. One of the biggest ways in which we've been able to do that, in last Congress, when the Democrats were fully in charge, we passed 2 historic and complementary laws, the Infrastructure Investment Act and the Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act. These are now being implemented, thank God. And it's gonna take time for us to see the full implementation, but we're well on our way. These landmark laws authorize the funding necessary for the U.S. to lead on addressing the climate change crisis and catalyze a clean energy transition that is truly gonna benefit everyone. And I emphasize that it's for the benefit of everyone because, for example, I grew up in a community where environmental injustice was there for many generations, and we're finally turning the corner there in our community. And these 2 landmark laws are gonna help us to do so. It's very important for us to understand that to get to net zero eventually, these pillar laws are going to be the main reason why we're able to do that. So I believe that we are on a good track, and I think that the Department of Energy is doing an amazing job in making sure that we're increasing energy efficiency, decarbonizing electricity, electrifying and uses, switching to cleaner fuels. So can you discuss how the department is leveraging these pathways through the IIJA and IRA in ways that ensures that the benefits and costs of transition are equitably distributed?
I'm so glad you asked this question because what you have done, what Congress has done is embed structural equity into these investments. So in other words, just as an example, if a solar developer wants to do a community solar project, they get the 30% tax credit, but they get an extra 10% if they locate in a disadvantaged community. They get another 10% on top of that if they pay prevailing wage, and if they use registered apprenticeships. They get another 10% on top of that if they use domestic content. Now you're talking about a 50, 60% tax credit to locate in a disadvantaged community. That is working across the country. So that's on the tax credit side. And on the grant side, from the bipartisan infrastructure law, DOE is ensuring that every grant we do has a community benefits agreement in it, so that the community that is going to be centered where this project is actually benefits and is at the table in a meaningful way with the company. And so all of the grants that we are doing ensure that. The study that has been done recently about whether disadvantaged communities are benefiting shows that disadvantaged communities are receiving twice the investment relative to their population as the rest of the country. So it is happening that investments are flowing toward disadvantaged communities, and that is good for all of us.
Wow, I'm very pleased to hear that Congress actually did it sounds like we did something right.
It's working.
And your methods of implementation are actually following the law to the letter and also making sure that the benefits and the inequities that we've had for generations now are being corrected by this massive implementation and investment.
Thank you so much. Last May, when you testified before this committee, I was pleased to hear about how the Department of Energy was advancing the Justice 40 initiative and ensuring communities had a seat at the table. Can you provide an update on how you've seen communities respond to the programs and incentives the Department has stood up through the IIJA and the IRA?
Yeah, thank you for that. So as I mentioned, we have these community benefits plans, but a lot of communities may not be organized in a way that allows them to meaningfully participate. And so we just launched a pilot called READY, which allows for an intermediary to sort of gather, a trusted entity to gather community leaders and community participants so that they are at the table literally when negotiating these community benefits agreements. It's a way to elevate and give power to folks who might not ever have even been asked before. So we're trying to figure out ways like that to make it happen, but the community benefits agreements alone have demonstrated enormous benefit for folks who are there, whether they're scholarships, guarantees of job hirings, training through local community colleges and schools as a pipeline. All of these things are embedded in the community benefits agreements, and we're seeing them work.
It's a national effort, but it sounds like we're finally getting it, that unless the locals are buying in, it's not going to work. And it looks like
100%.
they're buying in because we're making sure that they're heard and that they're listened to. Thank you very much. My time having expired, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that the nation's most recent nuclear reactor came online 100% this week at Plant Vogtle in the next Congressman's district. I'll recognize Mr. Allen for 5 minutes.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, we're very excited about this, and first in 30 years. So America needs to learn how to do big things again. And Chair Duncan, thank you for holding this hearing, and Secretary, thank you for being here today with us. Even as we, of course, we made tremendous progress in Georgia, but our country is facing an energy crisis. We're seeing skyrocketing energy prices as this administration continues its war on fossil fuel. I've been hearing from my constituents that in the district just how unsustainable energy prices are for them. And of course, it affects everything in their lives, everything. It's just not filling up the gas tank. There's been an aggressive push by this administration to electrify every sector of our livelihoods without weighing reliability or affordability. I believe we must unleash our domestic energy capabilities for the safety of our nation and well-being of those we serve. The United States leads the rest of the world in reduction of our carbon footprint, and it's substantial. And it's all been done because of the transition to our clean natural gas, which burns 42% cleaner. As mentioned earlier, the restriction on LNG exports recently announced is really a kick in the teeth to Europe and is funding the Russian war machine. Europe would substantially reduce their emissions by using our clean natural gas, or LNG. And if we could get these pipelines built to the coast of Louisiana, we would substantially damage Russia's economy and Iran's capability of funding terrorism. This week, as mentioned, we're celebrating a milestone with Plant Vogtle Unit 4 entering commercial operation, meaning we're doing our part in Georgia, making Plant Vogtle the largest nuclear power station in the country. In this committee, we've been working to advance nuclear energy policy by passing the Atomic Energy Advancement Act. In the Atomic Energy Advancement Act, a version of which we expect will be with the President soon, I have a provision that requires the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to update performance metrics and milestone schedules for its regulatory programs. Now the Department of Energy also has spending programs that are important for deployment of nuclear energy. Madam Secretary, do you have a program for updating your own performance metrics and milestone schedules?
For all of our big projects, yes.
Okay. Can you let us know what that process is?
Sure, it's through our, well, for the big demonstration projects, it's through our Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains Office, as well as through our Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. There are project developers and experts who are in those offices that have measurements, have Gantt charts, have milestones that they are working against. Same thing on our NNSA side. We have a lot of very large projects that are done by professionals who understand the importance of project management.
And so this is making, we're making progress with this?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Next, I'd like to note that recently you used your authority to update the NEPA process for transmission, solar, and storage projects, providing exclusions to speed up permitting decisions. You just said there should be a 2-year shot clock or categorical exercises for transmission permitting, and as far as the nuclear demonstrations. Will DOE work to do the same for any nuclear sitting and nuclear fuels and infrastructure projects under its jurisdiction?
We would certainly work with Congress too, because some of that might require you all to act, but we believe that there needs to be significant work done on permitting reform, whether it's for nuclear or any other project in the country, to be able to speed that up.
Now let's talk about building codes. The Republicans on this committee, Chair Rogers and Subcommittee Chair Duncan, recently sent you a letter with concerns regarding DOE's recent funding announcements to encourage the adoption of expensive building codes. I've got about 17 seconds. Could you respond to that?
We did.
And do you realize what that's going to do?
Well, it's not a mandate, just to be clear. It is just for those who raise their hand who want technical assistance to be able to adopt next generation building codes. It's not a requirement.
Okay, I have another question, but I'll submit it in writing. Thank you, Secretary, for your time.
Thank the gentleman. He yields back. I'll now go to Ms. Custer for 5 minutes.
Great, thank you very much. Secretary Granholm, I want to say I very much appreciate your calm demeanor and very thorough answers to our committee. I'm going to switch gears here a bit. Hydropower and pump storage are a critical part of our clean energy system. These resources will help incorporate more wind and solar onto the grid. A recent DOE study found hydropower can provide up to 10% of the operating reserves necessary for the Biden administration to achieve our climate goals. Do you agree that hydropower is a key part of our clean energy system?
Absolutely.
Great. This will go quickly then. While hydropower plants play a critical role in our energy system, the future may be in doubt. 1/3 of hydropower asset owners are actively considering surrendering their licenses and decommissioning their facilities. This puts 17 gigawatts of clean, flexible energy, enough to power over 13 million U.S. homes and businesses, at risk. One of the main factors leading hydropower asset owners to consider surrendering their license is the lengthy and uncertain relicensing process. Secretary Granholm, should Congress work to ensure that the relicensing process is not driving reliable, dispatchable, clean energy projects offline?
Yes.
Great, I agree. I'm pleased that there are bipartisan bills in the House and Senate to meaningfully reform the licensing and relicensing process, and I'd like to talk to you about the common features of those pieces of legislation. Recognizing that the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has jurisdiction over hydropower licensing and is an independent agency within DOE, I want to ask you some high-level questions about how we can improve hydropower licensing process. First question, do you think it is prudent for Congress to empower FERC to work with agencies and stakeholders in the relicensing process to resolve inconsistent or conflicting license terms?
Yes.
Thank you. Second question, FERC recently denied an application for a preliminary permit for a new pump storage facility that had not adequately consulted with the tribe on whose reservation the project would be sited. Should Congress do more to ensure tribal consent throughout the licensing process?
If possible, yes.
Great.
If possible on Congress's side, but we should
Yes.
definitely consult with tribes.
Yes. My final question, in New England, there are many small 100-plus-year-old hydropower facilities that may have outlived their useful life. It may be more economic for these asset owners to surrender the license than operate the facility that may be a hazard to the community and not making any money. Should we consider ways to make it easier for obsolete facilities to make end-of-life decisions.
Yes.
Great. It's clear there are many areas of congressional and administration agreement, and I look forward to working with the DOE and my colleagues here in this committee to get a bipartisan hydropower licensing reform bill signed into law. And I want to commend our chair, Kathy McMorris Rogers, for working with my team on that. Switching gears, I want to thanks to the tax credits and grants from the Inflation Reduction Act, the very last coal-fired power plant in New England, which is in my district in Bow, New Hampshire, is going to transition into a solar plant and battery storage facility. I cannot tell you how relieved my constituency will be for the clean air and the savings to our planet and the impact on climate change from that decision. Secretary Granholm, can we count on the DOE to give fair consideration to this facility's applications for IRA grants to help facilitate this transformation?
Yeah, this kind of transformation is exactly what you have provided for, you all in Congress, in making sure that energy communities get the benefit of still powering our nation for the next 100 years as well, through providing jobs in next-generation technologies. So congratulations on that. We want to see more of that.
We're very excited about the news. Thank you again for your leadership, for working with this committee in a bipartisan way. You'll find we have many, many areas of agreement with regard to clean energy and saving the planet, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you so much. With that, I
Gentlelady
yield
yields
back.
And I now go to Mr. Weber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, we're glad you're here. You know, I represent Texas 14, which is the upper Gulf Coast of Texas. Do you know how many LNG plants we have in Texas 14?
How many?
We have 2 that are currently operating. We have another one that's gone through phase 1 and is poised for phase 2, but the skids were kind of put on and makes our investors really nervous. We also have one across the Louisiana state line, that other foreign country, Cheniere Energy, which is about, I don't know, 7 or 8 miles from us. Energy and LNG for us is a big thing. So as the cabinet level Secretary of Energy responsible for coordinating the nation's energy policy, of course, you took it on yourself to be providing the president with some good energy policy, and that's your responsibility. Can you describe for us exactly what is John Podesta's role in the administration?
Well, I'd like to let him describe the role, but as you know, he is responsible for energy, technology, and climate.
Do y'all interface?
Yes.
How often?
Frequently.
Do you have discussions about LNG?
Yeah.
What does he say about it?
Well, he supports the notion of doing an update so that we can make sure that we can assess what's in the public interest.
But y'all would both agree probably that the uncertainty that that creates in a phase 2 construction project, because we don't have a date certain, is a problem, right?
Well, we have said, both to industry as well as to our international partners, that this is an update that's only for the purpose of a study, and it will be done by the end of this year, the beginning of next year, so it is limited in time and scope and does not affect any of the existing authorizations.
Well, it does, because they have to make plans, and I won't pry and ask you if you've ever owned or operated a business, but I have for 35 years. And one of the things business owners want is certainty. They don't want things changing on a whim. They need certainty, especially to plan something that far out, that big of a project. And I've been told that actually, I think Mr. Podesta might have a brother who actually works in some fashion for some foreign energy interest. Are you aware of that?
No.
Not aware of that? Okay. Y'all canceled your plans to refill the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Now, as I mentioned, no?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Just, we still plan to fill the
Right.
Strategic Petroleum Reserve. That one solicitation was over the amount that we wanted to purchase it at.
Would it surprise you to find out that we have 60% of SPR in my district on the Gulf Coast?
No, wouldn't surprise me.
Lots of energy, so what the president does, what the White House does, and what Congress does, quite frankly, is extremely important to our district. What are your plans going forward to refill the SPR? I might have missed out on some of the discussion.
Yeah, no worries. Our plan is to continue to seek solicitations. Our hope was to be able to get the purchases at under $79 per barrel. We sold it at about, on average, 94 or 95, and we wanted to achieve a savings for the taxpayers. So we have repurchased 32 million barrels up to this point, and as you're well aware, the SPR has a couple of sites that are under maintenance right now and can't take in, so hopefully by the end of this year, everything will be up and running.
What's the volume right now, do you know?
360, I want to say 360 something.
Okay. And when you're talking
Million,
about, of course,
360 million, just to be.
oh, I got it. Yeah, I got it. We always say in Texas, things are bigger anyway,
Yes.
so we get that. But the things on the geopolitical stage around the world, do y'all consult with the State Department when you're making these kinds of decisions that could actually impact our ability to respond to a strategic event, Strategic Petroleum Reserve?
Yes, of course, and we have the largest strategic petroleum reserve even now in
Capacity
the world.
wise, but we need
Well,
to-
no, but even the amount of barrels that we have from a government-owned strategic petroleum reserve, we have the largest in the world.
But were we to have to fight a war or conflict on more than one side, I think you'd agree with me that that amount would be woefully ready for us to actually be in a good spot. We'd rather have a full SPR to totally be able to supply our military if needed. Wouldn't that be a better scenario?
Well, sizing the SPR and what the strategic amount needs to be, I mean, do we have to have the full amount of the current SPR? That is a good question. It's a good question. However, we want to continue to fill it, and we will, and we're really proud of the fact that we've been able to do so at a savings.
My
to the
time's
taxpayer.
just about out. I'm going to leave you with one question.
Yes.
Is it better to have more of the SPR filled or less?
More, sure.
Thank you. I'm glad you understand that. I hope you work on it. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. I'll now go to Mr. Vesey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Texas relays are this weekend, and so I happily take the baton from my good friend, Mr. Weber, to talk about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act and how that's benefited Texas. BP Solutions received $31 million from DOE and Lone Star Storage Hub. Heidelberg Materials received $5 million from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. The Texas Division of Emergency Management received $60 million in GRIP funding for Grid Deployment Office. And that is great news for Texas, as all around the country, people are saying they're concerned about the economy and they're concerned about money. And so wanted to talk about how that money is coming back to Texas. I think that is awesome. Last weekend, we thwarted Vladimir Putin's plans, and we helped provide funding for Ukraine. And in addition to thwarting his plans, we were already thwarting his plans before that. I want to tell you how President Biden was thwarting Vladimir Putin's plans. In 2023, the United States produced a record of 38 trillion cubic feet of gas and a record 4.7 billion barrels of crude oil. And that created a record 238 million megawatts of solar power and a record 6.4 gigawatts of new batteries that were installed on the grid. But those numbers that I talked about with the gas and I talked about with the oil, that thwarted Vladimir Putin's plans. And so I congratulate the president on that. We need to keep Europe free, secure, and democratic. And Madam Secretary, you know that Texas and LNG is a big deal for Texas. And a lot of people, including myself, were concerned about the LNG pause. And I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about or explain to what extent the national labs are factoring the investment that has gone into their study. And what I'm referencing is the fact that the IRA provided about $1.5 billion for grants, rebates, contracts, and loans to support emission monitoring and methane reduction efforts here in the U.S. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so, and Congressman Dingell, I think your spot's right there if you want to. Oh, you didn't know, okay, oh, sorry. I think the MMRV, the methane mitigation, verification and reporting is a really important part of the strategy for us as a nation to have LNG or NG that is well received by those who receive our exports. And so that's an important thing, and I think that the natural gas industry recognizes that as well, the LNG terminals, et cetera. Everybody's focused on making sure that we are buttoning down our methane leakage. I'm not sure if that's exactly what you were asking, but we are investing in that from our Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management.
Oh, good, good. Also wanted to ask you and switch gears a little bit to nuclear fuel, and specifically the Idaho National Labs nuclear fabrication and deal that they have there. Through the NDAA last year in the appropriations bill, Congress authorized and funded the Nuclear Fuel Security Act to carry out processing and provision fuel that will provide American independence from Russia in the production of nuclear energy. The molten salt reactor in Texas is a test bed for a new nuclear reactor design and molten salt that could be used to help safely address critical energy needs when it comes to water, medical isotopes, and other important areas. Can you provide an update on DOE's implementation of the Nuclear Fuel Security Act, and more specifically, can you provide assurances that the DOE will prioritize the Idaho National Labs fabrication of a fuel that blends that blends this molten salt that is currently being stored at the Oak Ridge National Lab?
Yeah, we're excited about what Idaho is doing. We're excited about the partnership with Abilene Christian University and their efforts on this, and about how this whole effort might fit into our overall uranium strategy that was passed by Congress in the 2024 budget. So that'll be part of the fuel cycle considerations that we have through our Office of Nuclear Energy. Excited to be able to continue to work with them on that.
Yeah, thank you very much. I yield back. Thank you.
Chairman yields back, and I'll go to Mr. Balderson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for being here today. Last year, you and Administrator Reagan agreed to a memorandum of understanding on electrical grid reliability. What is the status of that MOU?
We entered into it, and as you saw, the EPA issued its rules regarding 111 and the vehicle rules as well.
So you have held meetings, both public and private?
Yes.
Okay. Would you be willing to, pardon me?
Our teams have.
Okay, would you be willing to follow up with the details of those meetings with the EPA,
Sure.
Including any transcripts to the committee, please?
I don't know that there were transcripts because they're just meetings, but
Okay.
happy to follow up.
Thank you, I appreciate that very much. I do want to follow up with a point you raised earlier this morning and during your budget hearing with the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources a few weeks ago. You've expressed concerns about the impact increasing LNG exports may have on domestic natural gas prices. That concern is one of the reasons your department went forward with the pause on approving new LNG exports. Is that correct?
It's one of the issues that are being researched by the national labs as we consider what's in the public interest.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to follow up on the concern. Since 2016, we've increased our LNG export capacity from 0 to over 11 billion cubic feet per day. We're now the world's top LNG exporter. And guess what? The spot price of natural gas has remained stable and affordable. In fact, the current Henry Hub spot price is well below $2 and is lower now than at any point between 2000 to when we began exporting in 2016, despite record inflation. Under President Biden, gasoline prices have gone up 48%, home heating is up 33%, electricity is up 29%, and total energy costs are up 39%. So if this administration was actually interested in ensuring affordable energy for our constituents, you wouldn't block leasing on federal lands, raise fees on natural gas producers, or force existing reliable generation into early retirement. Madam Secretary, you touched earlier on the fact that the EPA's Clean Power Plan 2.0 doesn't include existing natural gas-fired plants. However, the EPA has also begun the process of a separate rulemaking to target emissions from existing natural gas-fired power plants. Given the objectives of the MOU, have you discussed this potential rulemaking with Administrator Reagan?
I have not yet.
As that rule is developed, will you commit to working with grid operators and power plant operators as to the real-world effects of forcing existing natural gas fire plants to retire and urging the EPA to do the same?
I will definitely do that.
Thank you. As we've discussed, FERC, NERC, and grid operators have repeatedly expressed warnings and concerns about grid reliability and resource adequacy, sorry, I apologize, over the last year and a half. Unfortunately, last Thursday, the EPA decided to move forward with their emission rules for existing coal and new natural gas fire plants. At any point, did the Department of Energy express concerns to the EPA regarding the rules' impact on reliability and forcing existing reliable generation into early retirement?
We have worked with the EPA, and it is our opinion that it will not do that.
Okay. The recently announced final rule for distribution transformers and somewhat scaled back from the original proposed rule. The final rule extends the compliance timelines and adjusts efficiency targets to require less enforced steel. We are already facing a supply chain shortage, and utilities are having difficulty producing transformers. I still believe the final rule will add to this existing supply chain crisis. Can you explain how DOE plans to address the supply chain challenges moving forward?
Yeah, number one, the distribution rule, I think, alleviates that concern, and it extends another 5 years, as well as make sure that there's ample supply of grain-oriented electrical steel for those transformers made in the United States. There are issues still. We were just discussing this. Oops, she
Yes.
left. And because of the clear demand, there has been an additional 3 transformer manufacturers that have announced that they are expanding, and we just gave a grant to one of them for large power transformers, which is Siemens. We're encouraged by the private sector stepping up to the demand challenges, and we've also hoped that we can see some funding through the Defense Production Act to continually reinforce that we need additional transformer manufacturing in the U.S.
Okay. Do you believe American LNG has the potential to reduce the CO2 footprint in developing nations?
Potentially, and I think that's one of the issues that is going to be studied by the labs in the update.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I
Gentleman's
yield back.
time expired. I'll now recognize Mr. Palmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thought we had another Democrat ahead of me. I appreciate the opportunity. Secretary Granholm, thank you for being here. Earlier, you said that the power sector rules do not touch existing natural gas units, but the administration announced that it will begin a rulemaking to set standards for existing gas units. Is it coming next? And it is coming next, and I think fairly soon. Do you support the administration rescinding its rule-making on existing natural gas units?
I support looking at that, yes.
That is going to further increase energy cost that is battering families. I've heard you and a number of my colleagues across the aisle talk about the Inflation Reduction Act, which was either intentionally misnamed or a complete and total failure, because inflation is cumulatively since 2021, January 2021, is 19%. It's 40% on energy cost. Are you aware of, just for instance, what percent of the increase in food is related to energy cost?
The percent of the percent?
Well,
I'm sure that there is a component
I know
of
math is
food
tough
prices.
for some of you, but it's 60% of the increase in food cost is related to the increase in energy cost, making groceries unaffordable for many families. Are you aware of how it's impacted people's household utility cost?
Yeah, I'm aware that the prices for electricity and energy on a monthly basis have gone up. They're about $150 a month on average. And the question is, why? Why is this happening? As we were discussing before, The why is, in large measure, because the utilities are socializing the cost of upgrading the grid and the
Well,
rate basing
it's
those
because of the
improvements.
energy policies being imposed upon energy producers, the regulatory burden, the amount of uncertainty that Mr. Weber brought about increases the cost of capital. And that all gets passed on to the consumers. Businesses don't pay regulatory costs. They pass it on to the consumer, which it's really hurting families in my district. I visited the Central Alabama Food Bank and was surprised to find out 35% of the people who are having to rely on them for free groceries are senior citizens who can't afford their household utility bills and their medicine. Are you aware of how much of pharmaceuticals feedstock is related to petroleum? How much of that for making pharmaceuticals? I'll answer it for it's 99%. All of this cost gets added and passed on to the consumer. I have another question though. This is also a national security issue. The House, with I think unanimous Democratic support, I might be wrong, there might have been a couple of Democrats that voted against the funding for Ukraine, providing support for Ukraine, and that's critical, the defense of Ukraine. But this administration has put a pause on exporting LNG, forcing Europe to buy more natural gas from Russia. From the data that I have here, France just paid Russia 600 million euros. The EU is spending about $1 billion each month on Russian gas. So how does it make sense for the U.S. taxpayers to provide for the defense of Ukraine, which I think is important, but yet the administration wants to limit the amount of gas that we can export to Europe and allows Russia to continue to sell them gas to use that money to fund their war machine against Ukraine? That just seems to be in opposition. How do you
Let me just
how do you
clarify
justify that?
a couple of points that you made. Number one, there is no restriction on exports for any
That's not what I
facility
said, a pause
that has
on
been-
additional exports.
The pause is for authorizations for the future, but the existing
But you
terminals
understand that
are all
futures-
exporting. We are the largest exporter. None of the exports of
I'm not
LNG
arguing
to
that.
Europe have diminished. There are another.
That's not the
There's
point.
another-
You're misrepresenting what I'm saying. I just made the point that you create uncertainty in the marketplace, and Europe cannot rely on the United States to increase exports of natural gas, LNG, so they're having to buy it from Russia or
They are
Russia selling it to
not
other
because of
countries.
our action, sir, with respect, not because of our action. Nobody is stopping the existing authorizations
You
from going
just
forward.
misrepresented what I
40
said. I
well,
said you put a pause on additional exports.
But the point is that there have been, we export right now, we have the capacity of exporting 14
You're
billion
amazing.
cubic feet. We have authorized 48 billion cubic feet. All of that is going forward. So to suggest that our actions are somehow causing Europe to purchase from Russia is inaccurate with respect.
That is an inaccurate response to a very clear question. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and I'll go to Mr. Pence for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member DeGette for holding this. And thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. You know, back home, I'm in the Indiana 6th District. I spent my entire life in the petroleum distribution business. And I like to say I got the energy where it needed, when it needed to be there, affordably, in the quantities, and at the right time. I've held roundtables in Indiana every 2 or 3 months. It includes the state of Indiana, utilities, research universities like Purdue and Vincennes, parking and mobility experts, charging station developers. They've all joined together and they've shared with me what's happening on the ground. That's the most important thing. And of course, like all my peers, I've met with folks out here that tell me what's going on. Let me ask you a question I always ask others. It's a goofy question, but do you know how many cars they sell in Europe every year?
In Europe? No, I do not.
About 8 million. Do you know how many cars they sell in the United States every year?
Well, we've got over 300 million on the roads, I know that.
So about 16 million. These are round numbers. Yeah, and how many cars do they sell in China where we know they want EVs?
A lot more.
28 million. So sometimes I worry a little bit that what we're doing is we're rolling out supporting the automobile industry so that they can sell more cars in China. And I would laud Toyota that has looked at hybrids. Let me ask you this. Why haven't we looked more at hybrids instead of saying, let's go to EVs so fast?
We're in favor of hybrid electric.
You're in favor of it,
Yeah.
okay? Did you
And they get-
mandate,
they get tax
did you
credits too.
mandate hybrids by
Nobody's
2035?
mandating anything, just to be clear, there's no
Okay.
mandates, but hybrid electric vehicles are absolutely
So I
qualify
agree,
for the tax
nobody's mandating anything, but you're incentivizing the heck out of.
incentivizing hybrids too.
Sure, and in these roundtables, the first one I had about 18 months ago, I said, and there's about 30 people there, and we share what's happening out in the marketplace. I said, you're all here because of the incentives, the grants, and the dollars that the federal government are putting out. Now tell me how that's going. And it's one horror story after another. Are you aware of the problems with the EV, with the charging stations, with the processing systems in the charging stations, with the inability to get the electricity to where they want to put the charging stations, with the problems they have in urban areas where EVs or charging stations are a real problem in parking garages and apartment complexes?
100% I'm aware of that, and
What's
that's what
the-
the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Initiative is all about, is to fix those very problems.
So to give money to solve a problem
Well, to
that
create-
is
to
being
fix-
created by this administration.
To fix the gaps in the infrastructure associated with electric vehicles, yes, our goal is to get 500,000 charging stations out there across the country. Today, there are 188,000. There are still gaps. It is difficult to get
And you're
charging.
well aware of how many of those are not operating, that aren't
Yes,
working
and
when
part of
people
the
pull.
part of that whole initiative is to do a rip and replace.
So why
that states can do that.
here's what I'm saying, I'm not here to argue with you today. I'm for all of the above, like everybody else on this committee is, but why can't we be a little more cautious and take our time on rolling this out, going after the carbon industry? I'm a little concerned about e-RINs. I talked with the EPA the last time he was here. I think he'll be here in 2 weeks. I didn't know what e-RINs, what's the motivation behind e-RINs? Why can't the administration just take a little bit of a time out and reassess what's happening out in the field that my constituents tell me about?
Yeah, we're assessing every single day. And in fact, there's a lot of push for us to move much faster on the one hand, and some who are
They
saying
can't
we're
be
slower.
by the people that are out there implementing these things. The people I meet with, they're putting in the charging stations. They're the utility companies. They're the distribution companies. That whoever's telling you to move faster is not part of the solution of getting where you want to go and where we'd all like to go.
Well, I know we talked to different folks, but we are trying to solve for those very problems that you're describing. It takes on average 18 months to pull electricity to an area for a charging station, for a fast charger, where it doesn't already exist. The state of Indiana, has the funding to be able to do this, and they are doing it in their own way.
They're just shortage on transformers and things like that.
Right, we're
With
working
that,
on,
my time.
strive for all of those things, everywhere, all at once.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman. I yield
Chairman's
back.
time's expired. I'll now go to the next governor of North Dakota, Kelly Armstrong, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Earlier, you and my friend Ms. DeGette had a conversation, and we're talking about capture of the methane, and you said it's wasteful. And nobody wants methane in the air. Producers don't want it. Anybody doesn't want it. But I'm assuming the DOE has a financial incentive to capture that as well, right?
When you say we have a financial incentive, meaning we put out grants for those who can capture?
Well, a lot of that is, I'll back up. Do you know what the federal lease rate is? Royalty rate on a federal lease?
No, I don't.
Okay. It's either 3/16 or 16.67. And so this is one of the arguments that frustrates me in this because, you know what associated gas is, right?
Of course.
And it's gas that's produced within oil and gas. So there's only two ways to fully capture methane. That's either shut down oil production in order to get 100% capture, or replace the infrastructure with infrastructure, pipeline, all of those that captures 100% of all of that, right?
Right.
And so if we have an incentive and everybody says it's wasteful to do it, today, WTI is trading at $79.91 a barrel of oil, which, by the way, is amazing. Russia's invaded the Ukraine. We have a hot war in the Middle East, and at any other time in history, oil would be over $120 a barrel. And a big reason for that is places like North Dakota and the Permian and all of that. But at the same time, gas is trading at $1.92 an MCF. So the royalty rate applies to both of those. And so the financial incentive part of this and economically recoverable has always been a really frustrating argument to me, because the only way to recover that 32 cents on 192 MCF of gas is to lose $3.32 on the barrel of oil. Like, there's no other way to do it, because regardless if you're shutting in the oil production or you are shutting in the oil production to replace the infrastructure, if you take 1,000 barrels of oil offline of an oil well, and let's just say for simplicity's sake, you're taking 1,000 MCFs of gas off at the same time, you are losing, $79,910 on oil and $1,920 on an MCF of gas. But the problem is you don't get that 1,000 barrels back till the end of life of the oil well.
So this is why, your point is that it's not in anybody's financial interest to take care of this.
No, my point is if it's economically recoverable at 3/16, it's economically recoverable at 13/16. One thing, regardless of how we feel and wherever we're at on climate, and we don't want to release the methane, we don't want to do any of those things as well. But we can all agree that oil companies are pretty good at making money, and they look at these things in an economic standpoint. But when you are in the geographic center of the United States and you're double regulated from wellhead to market, and part of the reason you can't capture the gas is because you can't get the federal permit to get the gas in the pipeline, and then their response is you have to shut in your oil, and then we have far too many people saying, well, you have an economic incentive to recover that methane. You don't, because anybody who understands math, particularly if you're dealing with this, is going to take the $79,910 versus the $1,920. So we talk about what the requirements are and all of those things, but if it was economically recoverable to capture that methane, then the federal government should help pay for the infrastructure, or the NGOs should pay for the infrastructure and ask for the profit. The reason they don't is because it's not. And so we can talk about climate, we can talk all of that. It just really frustrates me when we have these comments that say, oh, it's economically recoverable and we don't want to waste it. Well, it is recoverable. It is a product that I don't think anybody wants to waste just outside of all the other ideological part of this, but it's not economically recoverable because we can't get the infrastructure in there.
Well, perhaps this is something we should be working on together to make sure that it is economically feasible for them to do that. Some of the programs that were passed in the bipartisan infrastructure law give us the ability to do grants for this purpose, but it's not enough. And so maybe that's something we should work on together.
And we can continue to work out. We get as much pipeline infrastructure in the ground in North Dakota as we possibly can. If we can work on getting some BIA permits and some interior permits as quickly as possible, we would have a lot less stranded gas in the Bakken, and we could actually produce more oil and gas, because the state of North Dakota has actually done a pretty good job of tamping down on that, recognizing that we have EPA primacy and nobody wants to flare. I come from western North Dakota, where oil and gas has absolutely revolutionized every economy out there, and even we don't like to see flares when we have them. But we have to recognize where we're at, and the difference on 3/16 on $1.92 versus 3/16 on 70.91 is a pretty significant difference for states like North Dakota, the federal government, and private mineral owners. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, is there not a presumption, a long-standing presumption through many Department of Energy studies that LNG exports are in the public interest?
There has been, yes.
When was the last study completed?
In 2018.
Okay. And what did it say?
It it allowed for the conditions in which it's of public interest. At that point,
Did you, when you took over as secretary, did you believe that 2018 study, that it was in the public interest?
I didn't have any reason to dispute it. However, since 2018, we were exporting at that point 4 BCF. Today, we have the capacity to do 14 with up to 48 authorized, and so that's such a huge volume increase.
Amazing increase, and it probably, a lot of it is in my district and other producing areas. By the way, you're still invited out there. We're waiting on you to visit. I think, do you agree that the Natural Gas Act authorizes you, the Department of Energy, to both conduct environmental studies and permit reviews simultaneously while conducting another study?
It does authorize us to.
Are you doing that?
No.
Why?
We're putting a hold on while there's all this stuff in the queue for the study, so that we know when we authorize next what that will
So it kind of
look like
seems
in
like
terms of the
more
public
of a
interest.
ban than a pause.
It's not a ban.
But you
Sir,
would,
it's not a
every
ban.
administration previous to this administration has done both simultaneously. Why
No,
are
that's
you
not true.
That is true.
I don't think that's true. I think
Please
there's
provide it-
one that was and one that wasn't.
Please provide us, even the Obama administration did this. So let me just move on to the next subject. I asked you last year if you were the principal advisor to the President of the United States on energy issues. You said you were one of the principal advisors. So who are the other principal advisors?
Well,
By name.
Ali Zaidi represents the Climate Office, the President's Advisor on Climate. John Podesta
Okay, so
also.
when did you make the recommendation on or before January 26th to pause exports of LNG? Was it your recommendation to the president? And did that occur in the White House?
That was my recommendation.
Did anybody else join in that meeting?
We have a group that joins to advise the president, yes.
Was John Podesta there?
Yes?
Did you meet with TikTok LNG critics with John Podesta?
No.
Did John Podesta meet with TikTok LNG critics?
I have no idea who he's met
Did
with.
anybody in your Department of Energy, any of your undersecretaries meet with the TikTok, I think Stop LNG
I don't know who that
influencers?
is. I'm sorry. No.
Okay. You're familiar with the reporting and the admittance of those meetings with John Podesta?
I am not.
Talk me through, I want to put myself in the cabinet room and understand what you told the president that has changed on our ability to export LNG to our partners and allies around the world, and why now? Because it seems very politically motivated. So tell this committee why it's not politically motivated, and talk us through what did you tell President Biden to say, this is an existential threat, we cannot approve any other LNG exports to non-FTA countries right now, we have to pause it. Talk us through that.
That's not what we said.
But you recommended that we did pause it.
Pardon me?
You did recommend to the president, it was you.
A pause for the study to answer the questions.
Right.
Because
So-
we have such an explosive growth in LNG exports.
Okay.
And the last time we did it, in 2018, we were only exporting 4 BCF, and
Do
we
we
now
have a
have authorized 48 billion.
Do we have a
cubic feet.
study?
Pardon me?
Do we have a study right now?
Right now? No,
Yeah.
they're in the process of doing that.
Who is they?
The national laboratories.
Which national laboratories?
The National Energy Laboratory in West Virginia, NETL, and the PNNL in West Washington.
But we don't have a study, but in previous
They're in the process
reports,
of doing the
you've
study.
said that they'll be wrapped up by the fall, but we don't really know much about it.
No, I don't know that I said that, but I've said in this hearing and in others that it would be by the end of this year, maybe the beginning of next year.
Okay. Talk to me about what allies have said to you, because there's only 14 FTAs, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what have our non-FTA allies said in response to this ban? I'm sorry, pause.
When we've told them it doesn't affect any existing
Yeah.
exports or any that have been authorized, that it will not affect the amount of LNG coming to them, that they'll still be able to access, and this will only last until the end of this year, they are perfectly comfortable.
Did you see the letter from the 35 members of the EU Parliament?
I did.
And do you agree with that, or do you disagree with that?
Well, I think they are operating under misperception.
I think they're operating in reality.
Well,
That
no,
the
they were
reality
not.
is that we have long-term contracts. So do you believe that the pause has a negative effect on long-term contracts?
Not the ones that are currently in operation.
Did other companies give you negative feedback? Because your Undersecretary Crabtree told me that they were not pleased.
I understand that some in the industry who may have pending authorization requests were not happy, but our review is in the public interest and not in the interest just of the oil and gas industry.
My time has expired. Thank you. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I'll now go to Mr. Joyce for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan and Ranking Member DeGette, for allowing me to waive on to today's hearing. And I want to thank you, Secretary Granholm, for testifying. We have discussed at length in this committee the problems with the drive for electric vehicles, and especially the California EV mandates that would ban sales of internal combustion engines by 2035. One of these major issues is infrastructure. I'm concerned that the federal government is abusing programs for IIJA to bail out states that do not have the infrastructure to meet the new EV mandates that they are adopting. Last month, the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation released that its strategy identified deployment areas as, and I'm quoting, states with regulations and market structures supporting zero-emission vehicles, unquote. Secretary Granholm, is the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation attempting to prioritize awards to states that have tied themselves to California standards when the law requires that awards for $5 billion in EV chargers be distributed on a formula basis to all states, not just those tied to California?
And the money has gone in formula to all of the states. All of their programs have been approved. 31 states have started solicitation.
And of those 31 states, how many of those are tied to the California mandates?
I don't know that any of them are tied to the California mandates. I don't understand that. But they're going. Another 26 states, I believe, have actually done solicitations and accepted those, and so they're taking steps forward. So we're encouraged by what we're seeing across the country.
Moving on, hydrogen is going to be an important energy source in the future. We both recognize that. My home state of Pennsylvania was chosen by DOE for 2 hydrogen hubs. We're very excited about the possibilities of this new technology. Would you agree that it will be impossible for hydrogen to succeed without private capital and companies investing significantly in its development?
Yes, and each of those hubs, all of the hubs, have significant private capital investment.
In Pennsylvania, we also have, as you know, a robust natural gas and nuclear industries that are anxious to get involved in the hydrogen production. The problem is the Treasury Department's proposed guidance for 45V tax credit, making it nearly impossible for blue or pink hydrogen to participate. With hydrogen hubs already expressing concerns about the 45V guidance, do you share with me the concern that the Treasury's proposed guidance might cripple the hydrogen hubs before they even get off the ground?
The proposed guidance was open for participation from stakeholders, and they received thousands and thousands of comments. Suffice it to say, we want these hubs to succeed.
I share that. I do want to see these hubs, particularly those in Pennsylvania, succeed. You, being the most senior energy official in America, are you engaging with the Treasury to make sure that 45V doesn't stifle hydrogen development?
We are engaging with Treasury.
Thank you. Another innovative technology being developed is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. In Pennsylvania, we are very excited about the potential of CCUS to keep our coal and our natural gas power plants running for decades to come. In the recently finalized EPA 111 rules covering existing coal and natural gas power plants, EPA is claiming carbon capture is adequately demonstrated and achievable. The problem that I have is that DOE continues to award grants to spur development of CCUS and create commercial scale demonstrations. Is CCUS adequately demonstrated and commercially viable as EPA claims, or juxtaposed to that, is it a promising yet unproven technology worthy of billions of dollars in research and development?
It is a proven technology.
So why is that disparity? Why does that occur? Why is it that we are seeing that a different algorithm being provided by the Department of Energy than what we're seeing from EPA?
The Department of Energy agrees with the EPA on the viability of this technology. We are issuing grants on demonstrations for different use cases, but we know the technology actually works. Petronova in Texas is an example. Previously, though, we had not placed, there had not been a price, essentially. Now there is on the gathering of carbon, of CO2, and so that gave the financial viability a leg up, and so the combination proves that the technology is good and the market is good.
Thank you for being here today, and again, Chairman, thank you for allowing me to wave on.
I thank the gentleman, and he yields back. I'll now go to Michigan's Ms. Dinkle for 5 minutes, and we're glad you're here and healthy. And so.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for letting us wave on and to Ms. Teget. And the good news is when you see the three of us, you know you're getting close to the end because we're the wave-ons. And it's wonderful to see you, Madam Secretary. I want to start, and I agree with my colleague on the other side about hydrogen hubs. We're very excited that we've got them in Michigan as well, and they are. When we do talk about alternative vehicles of the future, it's not all EVs. Hydrogen is, I keep saying to everybody, stop only talking EVs. But the world's going there. So I want to start by acknowledging how crucial the Biden administration's bipartisan infrastructure law has been to helping move us into the future and to update our country's infrastructure. It created the Joint Office of Energy and Transportation to help align resources and expertise across DOE and DOT to successfully electrify our roads. Through this joint office, and you were talking about it before, we've seen initiatives like the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program, which has allocated $7.5 billion for national electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Despite this significant investment, though, the rollout has been progressed slower than anybody wants, and we need to be perfectly frank. Can you, Secretary Granholm, tell us what specific obstacles has the Department of Energy faced in building the national EV charging network, and how is the department working to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, thank you for the question because it is really important. So right now we have 181,000 chargers across the country, most of that, of course, from the private sector. Our goal is to get to 500,000. We approved all 50 states plus the territories' plans. They have all gotten their funding in formula to be able to do that. 35 states have released solicitations. 21 states have announced awards. We expect that there will be 1,000 stations under this program by the end of 2024. There's the corridor program where we're filling in gaps on transportation corridors. And then there is what is known as CFI, or I like to call it rip and replace, where we're replacing existing charging stations that are broken so that we have as much charging availability as possible. Our challenge is that it takes about 18 months on average to pull electricity to a charger where electricity doesn't already exist. They have permitting issues at the state level. So the states are finding a little bit of difficulty in ramping up. However, we're now here. All of these solicitations are out. They have their plans. Their plans have been approved. So we're going to start to see more and more of the public chargers available throughout the course of this year and beyond.
So let's build on that. So Michigan recently announced its NEVI awards to develop new EV charging stations. How is DOE supporting the state transportation agencies in planning and implementing this charging rollout? And I'd like you to talk a little bit, because one of the complaints I get from everybody in California is that a lot of the chargers don't work and that it's a real problem. So.
Right. So on the how we're helping states is that the joint office between transportation and DOE has a whole suite of people who are doing technical assistance to help with both planning, permitting, design, et cetera. That's exciting. You know, it's called CFI. The Charging and Fueling Infrastructure is to replace 7,500 chargers, and we need to make sure that that states are doing that. They have been given funding for that as well. They've been given funding in two parts, one for the corridors and one for the rip and replace. And hopefully that's happening. The rip and replace should be easier. It's the lowest hanging fruit. You don't have to worry about permitting. You don't have to worry about getting electricity in. And so we're encouraging states to take that on first, even as they're getting the permitting for the other ones.
I'm going to have some other questions for the record, but I do need to bring this up. Last summer, many of the communities I've represented faced significant destruction from storms, as you know. Southeast Michigan keeps getting hit by, once every 100-year storms every year, including heavy rainfall, strong winds, and we had 7 tornadoes, 4 of them in my district, leading to road and bridge closures, fallen trees, power lines down, damages to structures and roads, overwhelmed warm weather, etc. At the peak, close to 500,000 customers lost power in southern Michigan, and it happens too much, and thousands remained without power for days. My goal is to ensure we're better prepared for these increasingly severe weather events impacting our communities. How is DOE working with utilities to quickly restore power to consumers and also strengthen grid resilience both during and after events like this?
Yeah, two responses on that. We are leading an energy sector coordinating council with the utilities to be able to do quick responses to help get up, but ultimately it is the utilities' responsibility to get the poles up, the transmission lines across. But the second thing is that Congress gave us funding to be able to support hardening the grid, expanding the grid, making the grid more resilient to these extreme weather events. And we are giving out those grants on a regular basis, and I think Michigan, in fact, got some of that to be able to do it. Ultimately, though, this is a huge infrastructure project across the country, not just in Michigan, and we need to invest in that infrastructure as well as the roads and bridges.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Julie yields back. Madam Secretary, we usually save the best for last, but it's not the case here, but I will recognize Mr. Carter for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to wave on and for that outstanding reference. Secretary Granholm, thank you for being here. Recently, the EPA has issued new PM rules that, and standards that are so close to the background levels in communities that even areas that meet the standards won't be able to permit new or expanded manufacturing, including manufacturing that is critical to building the clean environment and energy infrastructure that this administration is pursuing and pushing so hard. So as DOE implements programs to support new manufacturing, has it taken into consideration the new permit barriers that are created by EPA?
Well, as we give out grants, we don't take that into account. We take into account what the seeker of the funds is asking for and the kind of technology that they are
How do you feel about the
producing.
PM 2.5 rule and the standards?
I support
You
the
support it, even though it's so close to the background that many places aren't going to be able to.
But there's a lot of technology to be able to address
Understood.
that.
Can I give you an example of that? The largest single economic development project in the history of the state of Georgia is taking place right now in my district. And that's the EV manufacturing plant, the Hyundai. $5.5 billion investment, 8,100 jobs, probably that many more jobs in ancillary businesses. We're excited and appreciative that it's going there. Do you realize that that project would not be permitted today if the PM 2.5 standards were in place?
I don't have the information on that.
Okay, well, I hope you will look at that because it is true. We could not get that project today, and I know you want that project, and I want that project. Look, I think there's going to be a market for EVs. I don't agree with a lot of things with the government picking winners and losers, but at the same time, I think they're making a wise decision. There's going to be a market for EVs, and I think they're going to be very successful. That's why I want them to build this plant. So I hope you will look at that because these are high-quality jobs, high-paying jobs.
I know they are.
They are. They are.
35 factories that have come to Georgia as a result
Absolutely,
of this.
but aren't you concerned, because you're obviously pushing this as much as anyone, aren't you concerned that there are going to be other projects that aren't going to get permitted?
It's my understanding that that is not, in fact, the case, but I will,
Well, please,
I'll go back and look at it.
And please let me know. All right, let me shift gears here, if I could. We've heard reports recently, and we're certainly alarmed, that the Biden administration has pressured Ukraine to halt strikes on Russian energy facilities out of concern that it will impact Russia's oil production capacity and lead to increased global oil prices. As I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but you as the Secretary of the Department of Energy, it's your responsibility, or whoever might hold that position of Secretary, it's their responsibility to advise the President on matters relating to energy security and global energy markets. Did you advise the President on this?
This is not in my remit.
I'm sorry?
It's not in my remit.
It's not in your remit?
Right. It's not in my, that's the Department of State, it's not the Department of Energy that would.
So with an energy issue like this,
There's people in the White House who do that.
and you don't have any influence on this
Not on
at
that
all?
decision, not on that decision, no.
Well, can I ask you, do you believe that, that disrupting Russia's energy facilities will drive up global oil prices?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Surely you do. You're Secretary of Energy. Surely the Secretary of Energy of the... Yeah. I find that hard to believe, but nevertheless, and it's, perhaps I need to be educated here as exactly what the responsibilities of the department. It's a cabinet post. I thought that you were an advisor to the president.
I am an advisor to the president on domestic energy issues, and there is a whole suite of people in the White House who advise both on energy issues and global energy issues, and there's a whole national security implication here as well.
So you're washing your hands of this. You're not going to take any...
It's not saying I'm washing my hands. I'm involved in the things that I'm involved in. I was not involved in
But you're not involved in this?
Not in that decision, no, sir.
Okay, fair enough. We'll move on then. Let's talk about LNG and about the quote-unquote pause, if you will, which I think is more of a ban.
It's not a ban.
It's not a ban. It's a pause?
It's not a ban. It's a pause.
Okay, I want to get that straight. I assume you were involved in that decision.
I was.
Good, good. I think it is the worst decision that possibly could have been made. I think it economically and from a global emission standpoint, it was an awful decision. But nevertheless, I'm not the Secretary of Energy. You are. So there was a 2019 Department of Energy study that found that the life cycle of greenhouse gas emissions of the U.S. LNG is more than 40% cleaner than Russia. Certainly, we should be taking that in consideration when we make decisions like this. Do you agree that U.S. LNG is cleaner than Russian natural gas?
I do.
You do. Do you believe that U.S. energy workers deserve credit for what they're doing to expand the supply of clean natural gas?
Absolutely.
And are you concerned the announced pause on new LNG permits could undercut the progress that Americans and our allies are making to reduce emissions?
No, it will not.
It will not?
It will not.
Because they will be using Russian LNG that you just said is dirtier.
The pause is merely to the end of this year to conduct a study on what is in the national interest given the volumes. It does not affect current exports. It does not affect anything that has been authorized. We have authorized 48 billion cubic feet of exports. We're currently at 14 billion capacity.
Will it impact any exports in the first of next year?
Will it impact what?
Will it impact exports the first of next year?
We are waiting to see what the results of the study is based on a number of things.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to wave on to this very frustrating exchange. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back, and I'd like to thank Madam Secretary for being here today. Members may have additional written questions, which they'll submit in writing, and I just ask that they do that within 10 business days and that you respond within 10 business days. Upon receipt of the questions, ask unanimous consent to insert in the record documents included on the staff hearing documents list, and without objection, that'll be the order. And without objection, seeing no other members of Congress, we will stand adjourned.